Cool. Welcome back to another live stream. For this live stream, we're doing the famous, infamous, however you want to phrase it, um, Jordan Peterson. So, for anyone that doesn't know, Jordan Peterson. Well, before we go into that, let me just think if there's anything else we need to cover before we. No, I'll go over some other things after I've introduced to actually who he is. Okay, so Jordan Peterson is basically he was, well, I guess still, actually I'm not sure if he still is an academic. I don't know if he's given up his job or he's been fired or something like that. I'm not really sure, but basically he at least was and maybe still is an academic in Canada. He's Canadian, and he academic in, I don't, to be honest, I don't fully know what the difference is, but psychology, psychiatry, something like that. And he was an academic teaching at a university, but I think he was also practicing at the same time, or he'd had loads of experience practicing beforehand. I'm not sure on the details of his like career or whatever, but basically he was doing that. And the reason he became well known and came into like the limelight and came to what he is now, which is probably, I'm assuming everyone that is watching this has at least heard of Jordan Peterson. So the image they have in their mind of him, the reason he sort of went down that path is because in Canada they introduced a bill. I don't know all the legal details of it, whether it was actually passed or if it was just proposed at this point, but I think it was called Bill C-16, something like that. And it was basically it was about it was a sort of legal enforcement of maybe I'm going to say this and I'm going to be misinformed, but my understanding of it was from what I've seen, and the reason I haven't like fully looked into this for this stream is because it's not really the point of the stream. But basically, it was like legally mandating people to use the preferred pronouns of the person they're talking to, and if you didn't, I think then the person would have legal. They would have like a legal basis to be able to maybe sue you or something like that, or I don't really know what would happen from them. Anyway, so he kicked back. It got into the media, and it sort of went from there. And he became sort of like a, I don't know, like a sort of culture war figure. I'm assuming people know what I mean when I say the culture war, like it's been termed sort of like this fight between progressives and conservatives on like social issues. And yeah, he really came to prominence through that. And yeah, but that isn't really the topic of the stream. That's just how he became famous. He's really become a sort of like a figurehead of the conservative movement, or whatever you want to call it. But basically, the reason we're watching his videos today is because he has done thousands of hours probably of lectures on a whole different range of stuff. And in some of the talks and lectures he's done, he has commented on antinatalism. I believe he's read Benatar's book, Better Never to Have Been. And he also actually had a debate with Benatar as well, which I don't know if everyone here is aware of that. But yeah, he had a debate with Benatar. I actually, I think I should have figured out the timelines before I started this, but I actually think that the debate that Benatar had with Peterson was actually before Jordan Peterson became famous. So I think Jordan Peterson was actually just like some random academic at the time. Maybe he had some standing, but yeah, he wasn't as well known as he is now. And I guess, you know, either Benatar made contact with him or he made contact with Benatar. They got in contact somehow and had a debate around it. So that is one of the things we're going to be watching and reacting to today. And hey to everyone in the chat as well. I don't know if I'm going to say all your names right, but Nito, Masilia, Brick Films. Thanks all for joining. Yeah, so going to be reacting to that debate, which is about an hour long. So that's going to be like the bulk of everything. And I have seen that debate before, but it was about like 4 years ago I watched that debate. I think anyway. I think it was like 4 years ago. So it's quite hazy in my memory. I remember it being quite frustrating. So when I watch it again now, it's gonna be mostly fresh because I can't actually remember the substance of the debate. I just remember it being like really frustrating, and Jordan Peterson doing what he does best, which is, as you probably saw in the thumbnail, is using big words like fundamentally, and he drops them in there. Just in any sentence he's saying, he drops a big word in there, and it makes it sound more high level, big, intelligent than actually what he is saying. Like my personal opinion on John Peterson, like honestly, I don't follow him like actively. I don't really know what he's getting up to nowadays. Like I just see occasional headlines about him and stuff, so I don't know like super much about like what he's doing now. Like I know he's become more and more controversial, but yeah, I don't really have like a big opinion on Jordan Peterson himself. But let's get into it. And throughout the live, if anyone has any questions or any thoughts they want to say, drop them in the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on it, and hopefully I'll see anything that comes through, and I can always pause the video and comment on it, or if you have a question, I'll answer the question or anything like that. So we're gonna watch one relatively short video first before we watch the big infamous debate with old Davey B. So this first one, let me get it up. Hopefully you can see that. And please let me know straight away if there's an issue with the sound. I don't think there's going to be any technical issues, but if you can't hear anything, just drop it in the chat. So, yeah, this first one, let's get straight into it. So this is it right to bring a baby into this terrible world?
If she's awake. I had a client.
Oh, and just in case anyone's wondering, we're not watching it straight from the start because he just sort of like says some irrelevant stuff at the start. So we'll start here, and this is where the actual like relevant stuff is.
See me a while back, not very long ago. Woman who's about 30 and trying to make decisions about her life.
And sorry, if it cut off there, he's talking about a woman who came to saw him when he was a practitioner. So he like, you know, talked to people as a psychiatrist or psychologist or whatever he is, and, you know, helps them through, gives them advice, that sort of stuff.
And she was pretty career oriented, and so I asked her about, although maybe having a bit of trouble with her career. I've seen this many, many times. So this is an amalgam. This is a story that's an amalgam. And I talked to her about the other elements of her life. It's like, well, you know, there's only 5 things you do in life, so you've got your career down. You know, what do you do outside of your career that's meaningful and engaging? How are things going with your family? It could be your family of origin, your siblings, whatever. Do you have an intimate relationship? And like, what's your plan for your own family? And apart from those 5 things, there's sort of something like get some exercise now and then, don't eat too badly, and try to stay away from the drugs, you know. That kind of, and the crime, that kind of lays out life. And if you miss any of those 5 things, or if you do any of those other things wrong, then you're in trouble. And you can get away with missing a couple of them, but not all of them. You know, and she said something along the lines of, well, I'm not sure I should bring a child into this world. And I thought, oh, God, Christ, you got to come up with something better than that. It's such a bloody cliche, which is what I told her. I said, you know, you must have thought that up when you were 16. It's like, really? That?
Yeah, I think I'm assuming the woman that he was talking to was an antinatalist, but there's a lot more people like recently, I think, generally because of the like situation going on with the environment, and also maybe like I think because we're so surrounded by news nowadays, you know, on social media we see it so much. I think people are constantly bombarded with the things that are going on in the world, like the bad things, because the bad things generally get reported on more, at least is my understanding, like my perception. They generally get reported on more, and so I think the more we've become aware of all the things going on in the world that aren't great, I think, and the stuff that's going on with the environment, I think those are the 2 main things that cause people to say this thing of like, oh, I don't want to bring a kid or kids into like this specific terrible world. So they don't mean like, I don't want to create kids ever. I think they mean specifically like this world, because they perceive this world of going like and I don't say perceive as in I'm saying, oh, that's just their perception, they're wrong. I'm just saying, like, whether the perception is right or wrong, how they perceive it is that the world is going in a direction that is not great and is not good to impose on someone else. Like, it's a not good situation to impose on someone else. Like, obviously there's the whole thing of like, well, okay, those specific conditions clearly are not, good to impose on someone, but neither are the conditions that we would be in, like, regardless of that situation. Like, even if the environment was completely fine, even if, all political regimes were stable and stuff like this, and we weren't constantly bombarded by bad news, like, the arguments for antinatalism would still stand, independent of those things. But whatever, I think those are the two main things that are making more people, and also generally more like environmentally conscious people are more sort of like on the line of, yeah, I'm not sure I want to bring kids into this world. But like, obviously he calls it like a cliche, and like it's something that you came up with, you're 16 years old. I get this perception people have, like, I do think sometimes, like, or other, like, I don't know if it's antinatalists generally or just people who are like somewhat critical of procreation. Like, I do think sometimes it comes across as like we're sitting in our bedroom as teenagers and we're just like moody with the world and stuff like that. Maybe that's just like a PR thing. Like, he's not making a point about like antinatalism generally in a movement. He's just talking about that one woman. But like, it's true that generally, like, as a PR thing, I think we kind of need to lose the look of like, emo, wears black, like, depressed, all of this. Like, it's obviously, if you are those things, you don't have to hide yourself. And like, obviously, if you're depressed, like, there should be help for that and stuff. But generally, I don't think we should have that specific look aligned with our movement, even though it might be unavoidable. I don't know.
You can't do any better. This was a very, very smart woman. It's like, really, you can't do any better than that? It's like...
And also, he's saying like, oh, you can't do any better than that. Like, she's just sort of plucked it up with some he's almost implying like it's this simple, basic sort of seminar room thing that she's just like whipped up. But I don't know, like, sometimes the simplest things are correct. Like, should I be bringing a kid into this terrible world? And I can see things around me that are like going to shit and are bad. Like, should I be imposing that on someone? And like, things don't have to really be more complicated than that. It's like, if you use an example from animal rights, like, just saying, animals are suffering and we're causing their suffering. Very simple statement, but it's true. And a lot of things come from that, and a lot of things that humans need to change about what they're doing come from that. So sometimes very basic statements can be accurate and sometimes the most powerful, but obviously he's just dismissing it as a cliche.
Yes, obviously this is a vale of tears and a well of suffering and all of that. If you ask 30 people who are wondering about having children why they're wondering, 20 of them will say that. And so that tells you how original it is. It's not original at all. It's not a thought. It's like this little, it's a meme. It's something that lives in your mind. It's not a thought. And it's certainly not something that you should just take at face value.
I don't think I don't think like 20 out of 30 people, like, that's 2/3 of people. Like, given the rate that people are procreating, like, I don't think that's true. And then the other thing he's saying is like, it's a meme. She's just sort of like plucked it out. I can like somewhat get where he's coming from. Like, a lot of people cannot be the best at critical thinking, and they will just pick things up. They can just pick things up from the society around them and embed them in their head. And when they're asked about that subject, that thing just rises to the top because they haven't actually like fully considered it themselves. And that can be on like a whole range of issues. But that may be the case here, and why she's saying that. Maybe she's just heard that and is kind of accepting it because other people have said it. But I don't know, on the topic of procreation, like, which option of like, oh, I shouldn't bring a kid into the world, or I should, like, which one is the bigger meme? Like, which one is the most widespread in society and is the most likely to be implanted into someone's mind and them not think about it critically? I don't think it's the non-procreation one. I think it's pretty safe to assume it's the procreation one, given that the vast majority of people do it. And the vast majority of people, at least from my perception, I don't know if there have been any studies on this, but like my perception, and it seems like a reasonable one, is that the vast majority of people that do it don't really critically think about whether they should be doing it on a moral level. Like they might be critically thinking about bringing a child into the world in terms of like, am I ready for this emotionally, financially, this, or am I with the right person, all of this sort of stuff. But like on a moral level, like nil. I think hardly anyone, a very small minority of people that do actually bring people into the world actually think about it on a moral level. So the meme side and just plucking something out and having it in your head, I think that's more on the opposite of what he's saying.
Say, oh, well, I'm not having a family then. It's like, no. You kind of look at that and you criticize it a little bit. It's like, well, it's the other one. That's the other one that's very common. There's too many people on the planet already. It's like, I really don't like that statement. It's like, just who are you going to ask to leave? Just how are you going to get them to leave? You know?
What is he talking about? Well, so obviously he's not going to agree with this, and like the vast majority of people aren't. But in my opinion, like too many people on the planet is one person, right? But besides that, he's talking about like who are you going to ask to leave? Who is talking about leaving? Like when people say there's too many people on the planet, that is not a dog whistle for genocide. Like people are not saying, oh, there's too many people on the planet, we should go around and kill people or make them leave or like force them to like I don't know, take an injection to kill themselves painlessly or something like this. Like no one means that when they say that. What they mean is like we shouldn't be bringing more people here, and there's no victim of that, like because any supposed victim of like the unborn don't exist, never wanted to be here, aren't hurt by not being here, don't give a shit. So this whole thing of like, where does he even get that? Who's gonna leave? That is the most basic misunderstanding of that phrase I've ever heard.
A serious question. And who says there's too many people? What the hell's wrong with people anyways? Sort of. Or running around ruining the planet. Yeah. It's like, I think it was the Club of Rome who prophesied.
Well, like what's wrong with people? Like, I mean, you can't make general judgments about every individual person because there are loads of lovely people. Like I know loads of lovely people. There are some really good, warm-hearted people, but people in general, as a species, like I generally don't like judging people based on like group. But if you're looking at humans as a species, like we're awful. Like not just in terms of the environment, but the things we do to other species, the things we do to each other. Like, what does he mean? What is wrong with people? Like, is he not aware of the fact that people just gun each other down for generally no reason? Like, people just, like, enact violence on each other. People own each other as slaves. Like, people, all throughout history as well. Like, people do unspeakable things to non-human animals for no reason. Like, just because they want to taste their flesh. Like, what the fuck is up with that? Like, yeah, I don't know. I think he's clearly got a romanticized view of humans. If anyone's looking to learn more about that, the book's over there, so I'm not gonna like get up and go and get it, but in the book I'm reading at the moment, which is Debating Procreation, which is David Benatar and David Wasserman, I think his name is, and basically Benatar does for, Wasserman does against, and in the for, Benatar goes through like the misanthropic, basically like the dark side of humanity and like all the pain that we cause. That's a good one to read. But also if you just look up misanthropic argument for antinatalism online, should come up. Like it goes through all of the harms that humans do inflict on well, not all of them, but some of the harms that humans inflict on each other and others.
The way that there would be so many people on the planet by the year 2000 that there would be widespread starvation, and they were completely and utterly wrong about that. And I think it was the Club of Rome who either compared us to a virus or a cancer on the face of the planet. It's like, oh, really? That's what you think about people, eh? Aren't you something? Isn't that something to think about human beings? Viruses and cancer. What do you do with viruses and cancer? Invite them in and make them at home. It's like, no, you try to eradicate them. So you got to bloody well watch your metaphors, folks, because it isn't clear that you come up with them or that they run you. So you better watch them.
I think he's been somewhat simplistic there. Like you can hold two views of humans like in your head simultaneously without there being any contradiction. Like you can think generally like humans cause so much pain and suffering, and we go around doing so much evil, whether intentionally or unintentionally, to each other or non-humans as well. You can hold that thought in your head and have a negative view of humans and use negative terms to describe them, but then also hold simultaneously the view that, well, actually a lot of individual humans are like really nice people and we should treat them with compassion and kindness and this sort of thing, but as a species we're doing like all this awful shit. And also you can have an even more nuanced view of like even the really nice people who are compassionate or warm-hearted, they can be hurting others without even intentionally doing it, or just not realizing the what they're doing or the gravity of what they're doing. For example, all throughout history, good people who have done bad things. One example it's still going on today, but it was more common before, is obviously like human slavery. There would have been people out there who were nice, generally warm-hearted people, but they engaged in this institution. Today we also have like nice, warm-hearted people who, you can enjoy spending time around and are really nice people, but they fund the systemic abuse and killing of non-human animals and breeding them into existence. So it's like you can hold this nuanced view about humanity. I think he's just painting it as if like, oh, well, if you say something negative about humanity, you're just on this dark path, and all you can think about is the dark side of humanity, and you have no nuance. But actually, I think it's him that has no nuance, at least on that point.
So anyways, Mary, and Mary's the great mother, right? That she's the mother. That's what Mary is. Whether she existed or not is not the point. She exists at least as a hyper reality. She exists as the mother. Well, what's the sacrifice of the mother? Well, that's easy. If you're a mother, if you're a mother who's worth her salt, you offer your son to be destroyed by the world. That's what you do. I mean, that's what's going to happen, right? He's going to be born, he's going to suffer, he's going to have his trouble in life, he's going to have his illnesses, he's going to face his failures and catastrophes, and he's going to die. That's what's going to happen. And if you're awake, you know that, and then you say, well, perhaps he will live in a way that will justify that. And then you try to have that happen. And that's what makes you worthy of a statue like that.
What? Whatever statues exist or whatever, but like, maybe I'm misunderstanding what he's saying, but he seems to be painting that in like a positive light of like, this is like in some sort of like stoic way, this is like a virtuous thing to do, bring someone into existence. And like literally the thing he described there was pretty horrible, like bring someone into existence so they can like suffer and fail, and he said a few other things, and then die. Like, why would you put that on someone else? Like, if you exist and want to go through that and try and make your existence justified, okay, have at it, Hoss, it's up to you. But like, why would you put that on someone else? And then he just says like, yeah, and like create someone, put all that on them that I know is going to happen to them, like all those horrible things, and then just hope that they do something that makes it justified. What? Why would you make that gamble with someone else? Like, do that with your life if you want to. But like, why would you put that on someone else? That just makes no sense. That seems like completely batshit to me. It just seems like he's sort of like deluded himself here that, it's ethical to just create people as little pawns in your sort of like, what do you call it? Like a meta narrative of life, of like, our life is suffering, but we've got to overcome in some sort of like stoic way. Like, it seems like he's just treating people that he would create as pawns to go through this, like, I'm creating this person, and they're gonna rise up and make their existence justified. I don't know. That just seems kind of psycho to me.
But still, the sacrifice of the mother. Is it right to bring a baby into this terrible world? Well, every woman asks herself that question. Some say no, and they have the reasons. Mary answers yes voluntarily. Mary is the archetype of the woman who answers yes to life voluntarily. That's what that image means.
It's funny how he uses the word voluntarily there, like the mother, or like we don't need to even gender it, just like the parent, right? Because and the reason I sort of want to err on the side of not gendering it is because like I don't think the burden of antinatalism should fall on like more on women or more on men. I think like both should equally engage with this, and we shouldn't be focusing our sort of attention on one or the other. It should be both. And you know, it's for a whole range of reasons, but like one very basic reason is just like it's so easy with something like antinatalism, which is considered extreme or like seen as extreme on its own. Like if you start targeting specifically women, like it's not going to go well. Like you're just going to get painted as like anti-woman, anti-feminist, all this sort of stuff. So it's just like on a very basic level, just avoid that car crash. You don't need to do it. So just like talk about parents or whatever, or creators or whatever you want to call people. But anyway, I've forgotten what he was saying. Let me quickly rewind so that I can reply to what he was saying. Oh yeah, it was the use of the word voluntarily. So it's funny how he uses the word voluntarily, like the parent is voluntarily, you know, making this decision to bring someone else into the world. Does that seem like, yeah, they're voluntarily making the decision, but they're making a decision for someone else? Like, is it really appropriate to use the word voluntarily there? This is, you know, it's just like I'm voluntarily creating someone else and making that massive decision. Like literally the biggest decision you can make for someone else is create them. That's the most significant thing you can do to someone else. And I'm going to voluntarily take it upon myself to make that decision for someone else. Like, okay, yeah, you're making the decision, but like the whole voluntary part should be on the person being created. Like, have they volunteered? Like, no, they can't consent. They can't give their okay to this. So I don't know. I think the word voluntarily there is a bit like misplaced. He's centering too much the parent, whereas actually the center of moral concern should be the person being created, because that the parent makes the decision, but the person being created has to live with the decision. Obviously, in a way, the parent has to live with the decision as well, because they've got to raise the kid. But that was up to them. They made the decision. Like they could have not done that. So they live with the consequences of their own actions, and that's all good. Like if you make a decision and you know what is entailed in that, make that decision. But like if you're making a decision for someone else and they've got to live with the consequence of that, that's a different thing.
Is the archetype of the woman who answers yes to life voluntarily. That's what that image means. And not because she's blind. She knows what's going to happen. And so she's the archetypal representation of the woman who says yes to life, knowing full well what life is, not naive, not someone who got pregnant in the back seat of a 1957 Chevy.
Well, I mean, that's an even more messed up archetype then. Like, if you literally are aware of what life is, especially if you view it as what he was just saying before, and you then, like, intentionally, voluntarily create someone else and put that on them, you're, like, another level of messed up. Like, there are loads of people out there that don't, like, they don't really fully get what they're doing to someone, but he's describing someone who's, like, fully aware of what they're doing and the consequences of their action, and you still do it. I consider that a bit messed up.
No, in a one night of half-drunk idiocy, not that, but consciously, knowing what's to come. And then also allows it to happen, because that's another thing that's a testament to the courage of mothers. And my mother was good at this. My mother's a very agreeable person, too agreeable for her own good. But that's what happens if you're agreeable, because you're too agreeable for your own good. That's the definition of agreeable. And so she's a nice person, and still is. Luckily, she's still alive, and we've had a very good relationship, and I have always been able to make her laugh, which is a good thing. But she was tough cookie, that woman, you know. If remember once she came across I was out playing in this baseball diamond, little diamond.
I'm just going to speed it up because I don't know if he's going to go into some like random, irrelevant story about his mum. So I'm just going to speed it up. And then if he gets something else like relevant, then I'll slow it down.
And empty lot, really, in this little town I grew up in. And I was about 10, and she walked by. I was there with a bunch of my friends. And I was about to have a fist fight with this little tough kid that I hung around with. And there were half girls on the team, and the fist fight had some relationship to status maneuvering, you know, in relationship to that. Anyways, we were going to have a fight. And my mom walked by. She took a look, and I could see from her demeanor that she knew exactly what was about to happen. And she looked for a second, and then she walked by. And I thought, whoa, good work, Mom. No kidding, eh? It's like last bloody thing I needed at that moment was for her to come charging up and say, you boys aren't planning to have a fight, are you? It's like, well, yeah, Mom, we were actually planning to have a fight, and now that you came and intervened, I actually lost before the goddamn thing even started. So 2 thumbs up for Mom. She was also the person that said, because I had some trouble with my dad when I was adolescent, he had some trouble with me, so, it was 50-50. That's for now. It's probably 70-30 with me on this.
I think he's just going into random, irrelevant family stuff now, so let's move on to the big Davey B debate. And I'm not sure why this is here. This video may contain inappropriate for users. So, you've been warned. So, basically, for anyone that doesn't know, this is a debate between David Benatar, who is probably the most famous contemporary advocate for antinatalism. He's a academic philosopher in South Africa at the University of Cape Town. And he is going to have a debate here with Jordan Peterson. I think before Jordan Peterson was actually like well known and famous. And I think it was a radio show that actually set this up and got them hooked up. So let's, I think there's a quick intro from the radio station, so let's have a listen.
This is cliffcentral.com.
Welcome to the Renegade Report. I'm Jonathan.
And I am Ramon. And we have a little bit of a departure this week.
Yeah, something slightly different to our weekly podcasts. More of a debate format. We've invited two, how should we phrase it?
Well, two professors.
Two leaders in their fields. Two very popular people in terms of their views and their beliefs that they have written about and have spoken about.
So maybe Jordan Peterson was well known by this point. Maybe he'd released his book that was really popular, 12 Rules for Life. And also I love the South African accent as well. And there's 3 South Africans in this video.
And this came about because about 3 months ago, there was an article released in which one of our guests spoke about something that's very close to him, which is antinatalism. It's something he's worked on for a lot of his life. And Dr. Peterson is our other guest. We'll get there now. He responded to it and tweeted it out and said to people, here's this view. He didn't particularly agree.
What I'll do is at the end of this, I'll try and find that David Benatar article and the Jordan Peterson response, and I'll link them in the description.
And we saw that there was quite a reaction to that, and we thought let's get these two gentlemen into a room, so to speak. One of them lives in Cape Town, one of them lives in Toronto, so we had to kind of make some technical wizardry happen. And so we've got these two guests together today. So, Ramon, would you like to introduce the first?
So our first guest is Professor David Benatar. He's a professor of philosophy and the head of...
God, this guy has a husk of a voice. He's definitely smoking 40 a day.
Department of Philosophy at the University of Cape Town. He is the author of several books, namely Better to Never Have Been, which is on antinatalism, The Second Sexism, and his latest one, which is called The Human Predicament.
Yeah, and actually just a, I don't know, not foreshadowing, but like to add some anticipation into your life. If Yeah, at some point I'll be doing a David Benatar stream, which I'm looking forward to, and I'm gonna try and get it so it's a longer one. So I'll try and do it on a weekend, and I want to go over, because while antinatalism is interesting and all, and like the vast majority of the stuff that I'll be doing on the channel will be to do with it, it would be interesting to talk about like some other topics as well, or hear about some other topics. So I'll also be doing a David Benatar stream, and it won't just be Benatar on antinatalism. It'll be about all the things that he's sort of publicly, written about. But obviously, I won't be like reading through stuff, but like stuff that he's done interviews about and stuff like that. So obviously, that we'll go through like a antinatalism interview, and then he's also done an interview on his book, The Second Sexism. I've read that as well, and I've read The Human Predicament as well. I don't know if he's done any interview specifically on that, but he's also done an interview on the meaning of life as well. So there's at least 3 different topics there that he's done. So yeah, I don't exactly know when that's going to be, though. I think that might be a bit like more down the line.
His academic interests include moral and social philosophy, applied ethics, as well as the philosophy of law and religion.
And as mentioned, our other guest is Dr. Jordan B. Peterson. He is a professor of psychology at the University of Toronto. His main areas of study are abnormal, social, and personality psychology. He has particular interests in religious and ideological belief. He is the author of Maps of Meaning, and he's also the author of the upcoming book, 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos.
So his famous book hadn't been released yet. And I'm just going to put this on 1.25 because I've just seen how long it is. So hopefully, if this is too fast and you can't really like hear it properly, let me know and I'll put it back to normal speed.
And it's important to note that we do not intend to partake in this debate. We just invited the 2 professors to do the debate themselves. We will climb in if necessary, but we would like this to be a debate between the 2 professors as much as possible.
Absolutely. Let's get them on the line. And we have both Professor David Benatar and Professor Jordan B. Peterson on the line. David is in Cape Town, Jordan is in Toronto, and we are in Johannesburg. So this should be interesting. Gentlemen, as mentioned in the intro, David is well known for his work with regards to antinatalism. Jordan, you've come across it recently and have read David's work. And there was quite a polarized reaction to this online. And David, do you want to maybe just describe your basic premise and what antinatalism is?
Sure. Antinatalism is the view that it's wrong to bring new sentient beings into existence, and that would include new human beings. And there are a variety of arguments for that conclusion. I categorize them in 2 broad ways, either sort of philanthropic arguments or misanthropic arguments. Obviously, when I use those terms, I'm narrowing the scope of antinatalism and speaking specifically about human beings, but parallel points can be made about other species. So among the philanthropic arguments are arguments that bringing somebody into existence is bad because of what it does to that person that you bring into existence. And there are a range of arguments of that kind. Misanthropic arguments are ones which suggest we ought not to bring new human beings into existence because of the harms that they will do to other beings, including other human beings and other animals. Do you want me to say a bit more about what some of the arguments are?
If you...
And just before he goes on, so those are the 2 main groups of arguments that Benatar has made, but there are other sort of, I don't know what you want to call them, like supplementary arguments. They're not like categorical, because I think the philanthropic arguments are the strongest. They're like, up here. And I think the misanthropic are strong, but they're not as strong and categorical, so they're like down here. And then there's some other like supplementary arguments that are like down here, which are more sort of like compounding. Like if you use those arguments on their own, they maybe wouldn't be strong enough to get the conclusion of like that, therefore we shouldn't procreate and it's wrong to do so. But if you've got these other arguments, those ones are just sort of like more other nice to have things that are sort of like additional things you can chuck in there that might help to sort of tip the balance for convincing someone. And if you want to hear about those, then I mean, it's not an exhaustive list, but I've got like a list and fleshed out some on an antinatalist handbook, and so you can get the link in the description of this live stream. So just click on the description to expand it, click on an antinatalist handbook, and then go to the tab that's Why Antinatalism, and they're listed there. There's the philanthropic, misanthropic, and then there's some other sort of like supplementary arguments as well. Like, again, not exhaustive, so don't like start coming at me about like, oh, you've missed this out, you've missed that out. It's just like some key ones, and like hopefully they've been summarized well. But yeah,
That would be great.
Sure, so let me focus first on the philanthropic arguments. One argument that I have is a kind of axiological asymmetry. That is an asymmetry of value between the good things in life and the bad things in life. So obviously if you've got an existing person, the good things are good and the bad things are bad. But when you're contemplating bringing somebody into existence, you have to consider the counterfactual scenario where the person doesn't exist. And so I think that in that scenario, the absent bad things, that is the bad things that could have occurred to that person, but don't because they're not brought into existence, that's good. Whereas the absence of the good things that person would experience, that's not bad, and it's not bad because there's no need to be deprived of it. Now, there are lots of arguments that I have for that asymmetry. I think it's actually a quite widespread accepted asymmetry, except when people see where it leads. But I do have arguments as well to support.
Yeah, I think it is really widespread. Like, I've asked quite a few people, and if someone just like ask people this question. So don't tell someone, this might not work on somebody who already knows you're antinatalist, because it is generally when they find out where it leads, they then, freak out and they're like, oh, actually, I take that back, because they want to have a kid so bad, right? Or they just perceive it as such an extreme view. But like, find someone that doesn't know you're antinatalist or doesn't know what antinatalism is, and ask them basic questions that align with the asymmetry, and you're probably really likely to get them to agree with the asymmetry, and then just highlight the fact that, oh yeah, and it actually leads to this as well. And then you'll start to get a bit of like friction, and people will be like, okay, well, actually, I don't know. Because I do think it's a very widely held belief. I just think it's like common sense. And the sort of the basic one I always do with people is the sort of a very easy one that I think is easy for people to get their head around is the asymmetry in duties. So like sort of moral duties that we say that we should abide by. And I think most people agree with this is that, so if you have a couple that if they wanted to have a biological kid, they could only create a kid that would have like a really good life. They wouldn't experience bad. Like, they would just have a really good life. Everything about their life would be really good. Like, is that couple, and do they have a duty? Do they have some sort of obligation? Is there something compelling them to have that child? And most people will say no. Like, if they have that child, then it's really good. It's really good that they have a good life, and it's really good that they won't suffer any bad things once they're in existence. That's really good. But I think most people would agree, but you don't have a duty to bring them into existence, because if you don't create them, well, there's no one harmed, and there was no one to want to come into existence in the first place. But if you do, and they really enjoy everything, and life is only good, then it's happy days. But and this is where the asymmetry thing is. If you ask the same person, okay, well, there's a different couple, and if they have a biological kid, that kid will only experience harm. It will only have bad things in its life. It may experience a small amount of good, but like hardly any. It will just have bad things. Do you think that that couple has some sort of an obligation or a duty not to bring that life into existence, not to subject that child to that? And I think everyone will say, any decent person will say, yeah, of course, because even though they don't exist now, to not want the suffering, we know that it's going to be awful for them when they get into existence, and it's just awful to inflict that on someone. And I think that is a very basic way of describing the asymmetry. It's a specific way of framing the asymmetry with like duties and stuff, but I think that is one way that's quite basic and relatable for the average person that doesn't really think about philosophy a lot. That's a basic way of conveying the asymmetry to people, and just saying, well, like, look, so what can we garner from that? We can garner from that we have no reason to bring people into existence for them to experience the good things. We don't have any reason to do that. We don't have like a duty to do that. We're not wronging anyone if we don't do that. But if we do bring them into existence and they have a bad time and awful things happen to them and significant harm comes to them, and everyone in their life, me, you, everyone who's ever existed, will have some significant harm in their life. It's just inescapable. We do have a duty, we are sort of obliged to not impose that on someone else. And so if we don't have a reason to create people, but we do have a reason not to create people, then we should just always err on the side of, well, let's just not create them, because we're not harming them by not doing it, but we could really harm them by doing it. So I think that's like a basic way of conveying it. But anyway, I will let the big DB talk now.
Asymmetry. And if you follow...
Oh, sorry. And yeah, Cab in the chat says that that debate gets funnier the more you watch it. It does. Like, honestly, it becomes a mess. From memory, I haven't seen this for like 4 years, but like from memory, it just becomes a dumpster fire. All because of Jordan Peterson as well.
Asymmetry through to its conclusion, you find out that coming into existence can never be a net benefit. But that argument by itself is not sufficient to show that procreation is wrong, because it could be that coming into existence is just a mild harm, and it might be overridden by other kinds of considerations, including the interests of existing people in bringing these new people into existence. And so there's another argument, also a philanthropic argument, which says that the quality of human life is really bad, much worse than most people think. I don't mean in a given instance, I'm talking about over the course of a lifetime. And as a result of that, there's quite a serious harm that you're inflicting on somebody by bringing them into existence. And for that reason, I think that it's always wrong. There are also the misanthropic arguments. So if you bring somebody into existence, the likelihood that they're going to do quite a lot of damage is pretty high. And although I don't think that the misanthropic argument is a categorical argument against procreation, I think that at least in many cases it's going to overdetermine the case. So that's a kind of broad outline.
Thank you, David. So Jordan, having heard that and having read the book, which you have read in...
Yeah, and just on the misanthropic argument, like, that applies to both vegans and non-vegans, because I know that, in non-vegans, it's obviously clear, like, they are paying for the systemic abuse, exploitation, and killing of thousands of animals over their lifetime. But pretty much every day they're paying for some animals to be killed. And where was I going with that? Yeah, but like, vegans aren't left off the hook. Like, I know a lot of vegans who will say, yeah, but I'm vegan now, so, like, that sort of stuff doesn't apply to me. Like, I'm nice to people and I don't harm other animals. But it still applies to vegans. They don't get off the hook with the misanthropic argument. But I'm not going to go into that now. I am going to be doing a whole specific video on that one. And yeah, Cab is saying in the chat as well, you can tell that Peterson almost made Benatar lose his patience. And yeah, from memory, he does. Which is really, like, Jordan Peterson has to be a whole new kind of special to do that, because, like, David Benatar is probably one of the most calm-headed, considered, considerate, polite debaters, discussers, talkers I've ever listened to. And Jordan Peterson just, like...
Past. What are your main objections, if any, to David's arguments?
Well, the first thing that I would like to point out is that I don't have any disagreement with the idea that the claim that life is suffering is a valid claim. So that isn't the point of disagreement. I think that there's been a broad consensus reached at the deepest levels of human thought that there's an existential conundrum.
You see that? Deepest levels of human thought. He always just chucks those words in to make it sound more fancy. Deepest level of human. Fundamentally.
That's associated with being, and that the conundrum has two elements. One is the implicit tragedy of being, which seems to be a consequence of the limitations of conscious creatures like ourselves, the built-in limitations that are associated with mortality and suffering. And so you could think of that as the tragedy of life. And then the second category of suffering is a consequence of the malevolence that also seems to be part and parcel of human interactions and human existence. And the malevolence is something I would say that's not... The tragic element of being is something that you can also point out as characterizing the lives of animals.
Yeah, I think Jordan Peterson is actually making a decent point here about the suffering entailed in life having different categories, both internally and externally. So, like, so internally, the suffering that someone experiences themselves when you create someone, you're creating the guaranteed internal suffering, the suffering that is just going to be part of general life, that basically everyone experiences. But then on top of that, there will be additional suffering and like serious harm that I don't know what proportion of people will experience, but whoever you create, you're putting at risk of being part of that proportion. And this will be serious harms. Like, if someone is in like a serious accident, they are left with like lasting pain that's just horrible, or they're a burn victim, or they get brain cancer or something like this. Like, it's not going to happen to everyone, but there is a group of people that will be at risk of very serious harm on top of the baseline level of harm that everyone everyone experiences with the ebbs and flows of life. And then there's another type of harm which is like external, which is the harm we cause to others. And again, the background sort of level of baseline harm that we cause to others will depend on the culture we're born into, the society we're born into, the general level of technology and resources that we use as part of the standard of living we have. So it will differ by country and time as well. And then on top of that, you could create someone who, just goes around and gratuitously causes more suffering. This may be like a murderer or a rapist or some other person like this, or an animal abuser. So it's like, I think he's correct there.
The additional subjection to malevolence, whether it's our own personal malevolence or the malevolence of others, I think is something that's uniquely human. So the fundamental existential problem is suffering and malevolence. And I think that there's been broad consensus reached, as I said, at the deepest levels of human of philosophical and theological thought, that those are problems of an overwhelming magnitude. So, but it's the conclusion that's derived as a consequence of that observation that I have my problems with, and I have a variety of problems with them. The first issue is that let's talk about the asymmetry argument, that there's more suffering in life than there is good. The problem with that is that that the only way that you can derive that conclusion from the data, so to speak, is to...
I mean, he's literally just been going on about how life is suffering, and then he's like, well, actually, I think that maybe you can't really... I'm presuming this is what he's going to say. You can't actually get to the point where you can say that there's more suffering than bad. First of all, irrelevant to the asymmetry argument. That's more That's more of like the misanthropic argument. But yeah, if he agrees with the characterization of life is suffering, it's weird. It's kind of jarring to then go to your next point being, but I don't think we can. I don't think it's clear that we can say that there's more suffering than there is like good or benefit, or however you want to frame it. Because like, if you think that, then why do you agree with the characterization of life as life is suffering? Because that's quite sort of like, if you say life is suffering, that kind of has the implication that you do think that like at least the majority of life is suffering, or it's like it's defined by suffering. It's like the key part of life, how we should sort of view it through.
Weight the data a priori so that the suffering mathematically or arithmetically is seen to be of higher magnitude than the good. And since there's no way of assigning a weighting to the suffering or the pleasure, let's say, that isn't arbitrary, if you start with your conclusion, which is that life is...
I think Benatar goes into this later, so I won't do it too much, but I do think like it's generally accepted among people, and I think this is a reasonable assumption or analysis people have, that suffering weighs more than well-being. And I think Benatar will probably give this example, but like if you could take 5 minutes of the best pleasure for 5 minutes of the worst suffering, like would you take that deal? I think very few people would, because we know that, well, even if you took 1 minute of the worst suffering for 5 minutes of the best pleasure, like, because just of suffering is so much worse, and it can be so much worse. Like there's chronic pain, no such thing as chronic happiness. Like all of these sorts of things, like it is just worse than pleasure is better.
life is a phenomena that should never exist. All you have to do is work backwards from that conclusion and set the weightings properly, and then your premises can justify your conclusion, and that's a logical flaw.
But I don't think that's true, because I think so many people... because what he's saying is that David Benatar has that conclusion because he wanted that conclusion and has worked back. But so many people have the same... So have worked back to his premises, but those premises, as I was just saying before, and as Benatar said, are very commonly held among people, but they don't have the same conclusion, generally because of cognitive dissonance, or they just haven't been shown that there's a pathway from those premises to that conclusion. So I don't agree with that characterization of Benatar that he's making there. He's just kind of asserting that without providing any evidence. And like, how are you going to provide evidence? Well, you're going to get inside Benatar's mind. So yeah. I just think, like, you can't really say that he's working backwards when so many people share the thing that you're saying he's working backwards from.
That I saw permeating David's book on antinatalism. And it's you could think about it as a social scientist, is that, well, you have to set your weighting systems up, because I could say with perfect justification that one episode of romantic bliss is such that it outweighs all the suffering that I've ever encountered in my entire life. And there's no way of disproving that. I'm not saying that that's a valid claim, but there's no way of disproving...
Yeah, it's a bollocks claim, son.
...that claim, because the weighting system is arbitrary. So you can't make the case that there's an asymmetry without defining the asymmetry as extant to begin with. And, well, that's one, but I'll let David respond to that. But I have a variety of other objections as well.
So I don't think that's true. First of all, I've pointed out different asymmetries. The one is the axiological asymmetry, which I described. That's where we assign different values to the presence and absence of good things and bad things. But I've also referred, although not in that particular book, to empirical asymmetries between good and bad.
Well, and I would just ask Jordan Peterson, like, well, what is your what is your judgment of pain and pleasure? Like the goods and bads, or however you want to frame it. Because, like, if he says that, like, pleasure is more good than pain is bad, like, honestly, I think he's being disingenuous. Or he's not being disingenuous, but he's just so disconnected from reality, and he's just saying that or he's convinced himself of that just so that he can, like, win this debate or whatever, or score points. Because it's like, I don't think any rational person can say that and be taken seriously, or take themselves seriously.
And there I suggest that the bad things, as a matter of empirical fact, outweigh the good things in life. And I give some examples which I think will speak against somebody just asserting things to the contrary. This is specifically not a priori, it's a posteriori. It's a result of our experience of the world. So if you think, for example, about pains and pleasures, and you think about how long pleasures can go on and how short-lived, how long pains can go on, how short-lived pleasures are, I think you're going to see that's one metric whereby there's going to be more pain than pleasure. So think about the phenomenon of chronic pain. There are people who live their lives or lead large parts of their lives in chronic pain. They're in pain all the time. Nobody is sitting with chronic pleasure. There may be people who have an ongoing sense of satisfaction, but that's just mirrored by an ongoing sense of dissatisfaction. If we're looking specifically at pain, there is such a thing as chronic pain, there is no such thing as a chronic pleasure. If you think about how bad the worst pains are, they're much worse than the best pleasures are good. And we can test this with people. It may not be ethical to do so, but we could test it. We could offer people exchanges. We could say, we will give you 5 minutes or 10 minutes of the most sublime pleasure if you're willing to endure 2 or 3 minutes of the worst pains possible. That's not a deal that I think most rational people are going to take. If you think about how quickly people can...
Also, presumably that has been done with animals. That seems like a pretty basic experiment that would have been done. Like, obviously, I'm against testing on animals. That's completely unethical to do. But I'm just saying, given all the experiments that have been done on animals, surely that one has been done and the data is out there somewhere. Like, if it's not, we shouldn't do it. But given the massive history of animal testing, like, surely that's a pretty basic experiment that would have been done on animals. And the date, like, obviously, you can't make direct inferences from what happens to, I don't know who they would have tested on, a monkey or a dog or a rat or a mouse. But surely there's some data out there on that. I'm not really sure.
Become injured, and how slow recovery is if people recover at all. If you look at how long it takes to acquire knowledge and how quickly it can be lost, let's say by a blow to the head or by a stroke.
And I think these are all asymmetries that I don't think people take into account. Like, just life in general is just so much more weighted towards harm or the bad. Like we have to actively work on so many things to have the good, but the bad, they just come naturally. So like maybe you've already got it from what Benatar's saying, but like just some examples. Like hunger just comes about, but we actively have to go around seeking food to get it, to be able to satiate that hunger, right? Same with thirst and water. Exercise, like good health does not just naturally occur to us. Like we need to do exercise and put effort in to maintain all of these things. So like those are just some basic examples, and they're not all of them. There's a massive list of things that you could go through, but those are just some basic examples of like just to maintain like some reasonable standard of well-being and have an all right life. Like you have to put effort into that. But suffering and harm and dissatisfaction all just come naturally. They all just come without effort.
Or some other calamity of that kind. If you look at all these sorts of things, I think you can't resist the conclusion a posteriori that the bad things in life outweigh the good things.
Well, as I mentioned previously, I'm not disagreeing with the idea that there's an intrinsic element to life that involves both suffering and subjugation to malevolence. I'm just pointing out that you're making what's essentially an arithmetic argument. And in order to make that argument, the first thing is that you have to assume that these things are additive in some simple manner. Well, how else can you justify...
Well, he's just completely ignored everything that David's just said.
The asymmetry. You're making an arithmetical argument as far as I can tell.
The point about additivity is different from the point that you were making. So you were saying that I have to stipulate a priori that there is less good than there is bad. And my response to that is to say, no, I don't have to do that. When I'm speaking about these empirical asymmetries, the whole point about them is that they're not a priori, they're a posteriori. We acquire this knowledge by looking at the world to see the way it is. And when we do that, I'm suggesting, we find that there is going to be more bad than there is good.
Well, I understand that argument, but I would also say that you have to put parameters around your measurement processes in order to come up with that sort of
what are the
scheme, because you can't well, for example, if I do something good in the world, let's say, in order to measure that impact, you have to parameterize it in both time and space in some arbitrary manner, because you can't calculate the full consequences of, say, a good action on my part, because you don't know how that's going to propagate out into the future. So the point that I'm making is that in order to justify the asymmetry argument, you have to reduce your measurements in a qualitative manner, and that it's always possible to quibble, especially when you're deriving conclusions as serious as the ones that you're deriving. It's always possible to quibble and critique the manner in which you do that initial parameterization. And so you can always win the argument that you're making, because all you have to do is say, well, if you measure it properly, the suffering outweighs the good. But I would say, well, the measurement system is arbitrary, and it's tools.
I think like Peterson here is making a okay and not okay point. Just like looking at what Benatar's saying and saying arbitrary over and over again doesn't make the word arbitrary more applicable and correct. So I think he's just sort of, again, he's doing one of these things where he just throws this word out there. The thing that I do think he's making an okay point on is like at least how we are now, like we can't, at least I'm not aware of any way that you can actually like measure well-being and suffering. Like it's a very hard thing to actually measure. And on the point of like I was saying before, and like Benatar said, that people generally do tend to give higher weight to suffering than they do pleasure when we're talking about ethical decisions. But it also isn't clear what that weighting is. It is clear that we put significantly more weighting on suffering than we do pleasure or benefits or whatever you want to call them. But you can't really put a number on it. Maybe we'll get to a point where you can. I don't know what that would even look like, but maybe we'll get to a point where you can. But so that's a valid point that Jordan Peterson's making. But going from that to then just saying, well, it's all just arbitrary, it's not really the most adult thing and mature thing to do.
It's not arbitrary because we can go through one by one the various ways in which the bad outweighs the good, and we can have a discussion about that. It's not arbitrary. Somebody just comes to me and says, well, look, the best pleasures in life are much, much better than the worst pains are bad. we can test that. We can see whether they're really willing to take the exchanges that I was proposing earlier. And I don't think that
Well-
most rational people are going to do that.
Well, I
So
agree
this is not
with
something
you
I'm just
completely.
arbitrarily stipulating.
Well, here's how it's arbitrary. The first thing is that the laboratory condition that you're describing, which is, well, would you be willing to be subjected to the worst torture in order to have the most sublime experience? The answer to that is no. Doesn't indicate that there's an asymmetry in experience. It just indicates that you can set up a laboratory condition under which you can make someone's life sufficiently unbearable in the moment so that they would wish for its cessation. And I wouldn't dispute that for a moment. But I don't
Well, that
think
tells
that
us something
that
about the
justifies only if you assume, for example, that the justification for the world is the balance between pleasure and pain, and that those are somehow opposing forces, and that the way that you justify the world is by saying that it involves more pleasure than pain. And that's another part of your argument that I think is
But that's the same part of the argument. So you
Did Jordan Peterson just try to claim? Well, he didn't actually make the statement, but he seemed to be undermining the claim that the world has more suffering in than goodness or well-being, or however you want to call it. Like, anyone who makes that analysis, I think, is like severely mentally impaired in how they view the world, like massive, or just completely ignorant of so many of the ways that suffering exists. And they're probably being like very human-centric as well. Because I mean, even the suffering and untold horrors that animals are going through, even if you ignore humans and just focus on the suffering that animals are going through, non-human animals, even that alone, like, what level of pleasure or well-being or satisfaction, or however you want to phrase it, is going to stack up to that? None. Like you'd literally have to be mental to think that there's more pleasure and well-being, or whatever you want to call it, in the world than there is suffering.
you're constantly saying
And even that is irrelevant to the asymmetry anyway. The axiological asymmetry, not to the empirical ones.
that I'm just asserting that there's more bad than good. And
Yeah, I
I'm
think
not
it's
just
built into
asserting
your
that I'm-
measurement structure.
No, I'm trying to break it down. So I've made that claim, but I want to substantiate that claim through a series of more modest claims of the kind that I've mentioned. And your response to me is to say, well, that's just arbitrary. Now, what I will concede to you is that there can be no certainty in this. So, of course, there can be uncertainty. If I do something good, I don't know what all the consequences of that are going to be. So I'm going to have an element of uncertainty about that. Similarly, if I do something bad, I'm going to be uncertain about all the consequences of that. So I'm not making the claim that any one of us is omniscient and that we can know every last variable here. But if we're trying to understand something about the world, there are certain things that we have access to, there's certain bits of knowledge that we have, and I'm suggesting that on the basis of that, we ought to reach the conclusion, and it is a conclusion, not a premise, we ought to reach the conclusion that there is more bad than good.
Okay, so let's imagine that we derive a arithmetic statement such that there's 4 units of suffering for every 2 units of pleasure. And so you make a ratio 4 to 2, and you say, well, it's 2 to 1 against pleasure on the pain side. And that, as far as I can tell, that's the arithmetic equivalent of your argument. And I would say, well, the fact that there's uncertainty in those initial measures means that you can't go down the arithmetic path. Because the only way that you can make an arithmetic argument is by not having that kind of uncertainty in your initial measurements. And you're also assuming that the appropriate way to judge the quality of life is by doing a pleasure versus pain calculation. And I think I don't see that powerful arguments for the justification of being are predicated on the notion that you can do a simple pleasure minus pain or pain minus pleasure arithmetic analysis and come out with a deficit on the side of pleasure and therefore conclude that being is not justifiable. And I think that the more
See, this is one of the issues with this debate with Jordan Peterson, is he doesn't even understand what antinatalism is. Like, he clearly didn't understand what Benatar was talking about in his article. I don't know if at this point he'd read Benatar's book, because what he just said there is that he said something along the lines of being is not justified, or something like that, to that effect. But that's not what antinatalism is about. If people could make their own decision to create themselves, then do what you want. You're taking your own risks. You're imposing things on yourself. That's up to you. You're your own agent. Have at it, Hoss. The whole point is that you're doing it to someone else. You're making a decision for someone else. You're imposing something on someone else. You're exposing someone else to risk. It's all about the fact that you're doing it to someone else. If life was just something that you made a decision about yourself for, personally, I wouldn't have any problem. I don't give a shit what you do. Like, it's up to you. But that's not how it works. One person has to create another, and that's where the issue comes in. And that is such a fundamental thing. And it comes across to me as if he doesn't even get that. So it's just like straight from the off in this debate, he just clearly doesn't know what he's arguing against.
Oversimplifications of my position. First of all, you're assuming that I'm going to put a numerical number. I'm going to put a number on the claim that I'm making about the pain outweigh.
And Massilia, I think I'm saying your name right. Hopefully, I'm saying your name right. Has just put in the chat. I love how the most known, which doesn't mean the best, pseudo-intellectuals, philosophers have a really hard time debunking antinatalism or even veganism for most of them. Yeah, because I just think these are like very rational, logical positions to hold. I mean, the classic one is Sam Harris and veganism. Like, Sam Harris, clearly a very intelligent, considered person, has put a really good, has put loads of high quality stuff out there. And personally, I think Sam Harris has done a lot of good for a lot of people. Even in practical terms, like even with like his waking up app and stuff like that. Done a lot of good stuff. But when he gets questioned about veganism, he just gets annihilated. He just starts chatting bollocks. He's just chatting utter bullshit. He just doesn't know what he's on about. And it's just the cognitive dissonance. And I think that's one reason why people should not get swept away by intellectuals or figureheads or stuff like this. Like, if someone has spent their whole life studying something and is if someone is clearly very intelligent and has spent their whole time studying something and is very considered, okay, yeah, listen to them and maybe give their opinion more weight than the average person on the street, but don't take it all as gospel. Don't just like blindly follow them and stuff like this, because even those intellectuals, like take Sam Harris as an example, like he's clearly, really intelligent and has, thoughtful and considered opinions on many topics. But if someone were to just follow him and think, Sam Harris is the Lord and Savior or whatever, then it's like they are going to be inclined to follow his logic on something like veganism as well, which he's just not. Well, he's just got no logic for. He's an idiot on that topic, to be honest. And I can't remember what else I was going to say. But yeah, I mean, even take me and David Benatar. I admire David Benatar a lot. Like, I really like listening to him debate and discuss things. I appreciate all of the work that I've watched of his or listened or read of his. I think he's super intelligent, very considered. But I don't think he's some deity. I don't think he's like infallible. I've read certain things of his which I've been like, I can see where he's coming from, but maybe I don't like fully agree on that specific thing. So it's like, I just don't, even if you find an intellectual that you think you'd agree on everything with, and for me, like, that is someone like David Benatar, like, not everything, but like, I agree with, out of everything I've heard him speak on, I agree with like the vast majority of what he said, but don't hold me to that. Like, I can change my mind, and something might come out that he said that I haven't like heard before. It's like a new thing, and then I don't agree with that or whatever. But like, yeah, you can agree with the vast majority of what someone says, but you don't have to like then take on everything. Just be like skeptical about people.
The pleasure, and I'm not doing that. I'm specifically.
Well, you are if you're making an argument of asymmetry. That's exactly what you're doing, because you can't make an argument of asymmetry otherwise.
There's a difference between saying that we have every reason for thinking that there is more pain in the world than there is pleasure. There's a difference between saying that and saying that I can give you the precise ratio between the two. You parody my position if you reduce me to the sort of specific claim that you're saying, the very precise claim.
No, I specify it and make it precise, but I'm willing to go with your secondary claim, which is, okay, you can't specify the ratio precisely, you can specialize it vaguely, and it still comes out negatively with regards to the value of being. I'm willing to go along with that without, but I just think that's a vague arithmetic claim instead of a precise one. I don't think that improves it in the least.
It doesn't have to be precise. In fact, it's ridiculous if you make it precise. But if it's vague...
Yes, precisely.
Yeah, but if you keep it vague, it can be true and vague.
Yeah, it can be true and vague. I think David Benatar has conceded something sensible there. I don't even know if conceded is the word, because it makes him sound like he's on the back foot where he's clearly not here. But like, he's conceded something here that, you know, if you were to make a detailed claim about this, then clearly it would be delusional, not delusional, but like ridiculous. So, but it can be true and vague, and Jordan Peterson is acting here like he's like won some point. Fucking hell.
There can be things that are true and vague. You can have make a statement of a very general kind that is true without you being able to make that in a very precise way. And the second point that you made a moment ago was to suggest that I'm reducing all of this to pleasure and pain, and I've quite specifically stated on multiple occasions that I'm not doing that. That when I speak about pleasures and pains, I'm using those as exemplars of the good things and the bad things in life, and I frequently speak about things that go beyond pleasure and pain. So a moment ago I gave the example of knowledge, and I said how difficult it is to acquire knowledge. It's an arduous process, but you can lose things very rapidly and effortlessly. So there's an example that does not boil down to pleasure and pain. It's about the good things and the bad things in life, but it shows how there's going to be more bad
All
than
right,
good.
two things about that. I would say that still does boil down in some sense to a pleasure versus pain argument, because the implicit claim is that because knowledge is difficult and it can be removed rapidly in an asymmetric manner, that's somehow bad, and bad, as far as I can tell, given the manner in which you're structuring your argument, is associated with something like pain or lack of pleasure.
No,
but
I'm specifically
I'm also,
denying that.
sorry, one more thing. I'm not disputing the fact that life is tragic and that people are subject to malevolence, let's say. What I'm disputing is your claim that the fact that that's the case means that you can move to the next position in your argument and to argue that being as such is something that should not exist. So we have to stop arguing about whether...
Again, he's making that completely... He just obviously doesn't understand antinatalism. He's doing the thing of like, life is tragic, therefore it shouldn't exist. But that's not really what antinatalism is saying. At least from my perspective. If you disagree with me, like put it in the chat. But like my perspective is that antinatalism is more about it's more aimed on procreation, and procreation is creating life. It's not really about life itself. Like it is kind of about that, but it's more about the action of creating new life, which is an action. And Peterson is just not getting that. He's just saying that, you know, life should not exist, but it's all about, for me, I don't really care if life exists. It's about creating new life. If the life that already exists somehow gets the power of like immortality, and, you know, the people that exist now can live forever, if you want to choose to do that, that's up to you. But it's about creating new sentient life, and he's just completely missed that.
or not life is suffering, because I'm already willing to make that claim. I'm even willing to accept the claim that it's asymmetric in favor of suffering. And this is a more... So let's leave the arithmetic argument behind, although I do think that you're basically making an arithmetic argument.
Christ. So he's just said that he's willing to accept that it's asymmetric, and then he's saying, oh, but you're making an arithmetic argument. But he wasn't making an arithmetic argument. I mean, you can make an arithmetic argument on top of it, but basically what Benatar was saying was just like, I think there is an asymmetry where pain is weighted more than pleasure is. And Jordan Peterson just said, like, yeah, I'll agree with that, but I don't agree with your claim. Well, that is his claim. Fucking hell. Like, if I've misunderstood, someone please put it in the chat, but...
Precise or vague. But even if you're not, and what you're doing is saying that there's an asymmetry in favor of suffering, okay, that's fine. I also believe that. But to move beyond that and say that because there's an asymmetry in favor of suffering, that being is something that isn't justifiable, doesn't follow from that premise, not self-evidently. And okay, so there's a deeper flaw, which is that if you...
Yeah, and again, he's misunderstood. He's trying to say that Benatar is saying that because of the misanthropic argument, therefore antinatalism is not justified. Like, he didn't say that because he doesn't understand what antinatalism is. But let's assume, let's give Jordan Peterson the benefit of the doubt and help him out, and let's say that he does understand what it is. He's kind of saying that Benatar is resting on the misanthropic argument, but he's not. Benatar literally said in the start of the interview that the philanthropic arguments are the main things and the categorical things. The misanthropic ones are sort of like bolsters. They are like compounding arguments, you know. They buttress it, but it's not the foundation.
Do accept the fact that suffering justifies the desire for non-being, then the actions that are predicated on the acceptance of that presupposition exacerbate suffering rather than reducing it, which I think is that's the part of the argument that you're making that I think is actually, I think it's ethically dangerous.
Well, it'd be interesting. I don't know if I can't remember if he elaborates on this, but it'd be interesting to say to hear what Jordan Peterson has to say about that, because that's an empirical claim. Like, that could be true. I don't know. Like, it could be true that, antinatalism as an idea does encourage certain actions that would cause more suffering, but he has to actually explain why. So let's see if he actually does that.
And I'll get into that later. So
good. Okay, so I think it is good that we move on. But before we move on, as you've suggested, I want to just reiterate that you've suggested that when I attribute value to knowledge, that I'm reducing that to pleasure and ignorance to pain. And I want to just clarify that I'm not doing that.
I'm suggesting that
I think everything is boiled down to pleasure and pain.
I'm suggesting that you're implicitly assuming that the loss of knowledge is akin to pain, or people wouldn't object to it. Not that ignorance is pain, that the sudden loss of acquired knowledge is pain. Okay, if it's not pain, then what is it?
It's something else that's bad. In fact, I often think that knowledge involves pain, and ignorance often involves pleasure. So I'm certainly not thinking that the loss of knowledge is bad because it involves pain.
Then why is it bad?
Knowledge, well,
why is it bad in your scheme?
Because I think that knowledge is generally a good thing. There are going to be occasions where it's not, but generally it's a good thing. And not because of the pleasure that it brings us, but because of the understanding that it brings us about the world.
Okay, but what about, I'm not disagreeing with that. It's the loss of, the specific issue is you're making the case that the loss of knowledge, especially the sudden loss of hard accrued knowledge, is somehow negative, if we can't say pain. That people associate that with suffering, or they wouldn't object to it. And that's what I'm trying to get at. Well, then why would they object to the fact that their hard-earned knowledge can be...
But would I think Jordan Peterson is debating a point that he agrees on. Like, surely he agree. Like, if someone hit Jordan Peterson over the head, and if someone just tapped a button or something like that, and Jordan Peterson lost the knowledge that he had now, and he was, able to sort of view this situation from a third party perspective, like, surely he would be like, yep, I've been harmed there. Like, that's a bad thing that happened there, because me having more knowledge, that was like good. It's not always better to have more knowledge. But like, generally, as a general rule of thumb, it is better to have more knowledge. It's a good thing, and it's a bad thing that if you lose that, especially if it's unconsensually or unintended and sudden. So, like, I think Jordan Peterson would agree with that. I don't know why he's debating that point.
Can suddenly disappear.
And like, if someone's going to say, oh, well, he's debating that point because he, even though he agrees, he wants to work with David Benatar to find the foundation of that. First of all, it doesn't come across like he wants to work with David Benatar. But second of all, like, finding the foundation of these things, like, maybe you can, but sometimes things just bottom out. Like, if someone says, yeah, I think suffering is a bad thing, like, what's the argument for that? There isn't really one. It's just an axiological thing, isn't it? That basically, like, I think I haven't met anyone ever or heard of anyone that disagrees with that. It's just a basic axiological thing. You can't really make an argument for suffering is bad. It's just the fact that suffering is bad. So I don't know what Jordan Peterson really wants from this line of inquiry.
Because gaining the knowledge was good and losing it is bad, and it doesn't have to be that you suffer as a result of the loss in order for it to be bad.
Okay, then let's define bad. It seems to me that you're defining bad, like, one of the key elements of your entire argument is that bad is associated with suffering. And that's because that's what's justifying your antinatalist position. So if loss of knowledge is... Okay, go ahead.
You keep saying that I'm associating bad with a pain, and I'm telling you I'm not doing that.
Okay, what are you associating it with?
Well, I think there can be a variety of things that can be good, different things that can be good, and different things that can be bad. So
well, let's define bad. Sure. Pain, okay.
Pain is one thing that's bad. I think ignorance is bad. I think that malevolence is bad. So
okay, why is ignorance bad?
Unfulfilled desires as well. Well, let me clarify that. Like, obviously, some desires can only be fulfilled by unethical means. I just mean, like, the state of being in an unsatisfied state is bad. But obviously, even though it's bad, it may be preferable to the alternative, because it could be worse if it's fulfilled, if you get what I mean.
Bad.
Well, because knowledge is something that's valuable. It's the flip side of it. But what I'm worried we're going to get down, I think we are going to get bogged down if we go down this route. And I don't think that you and I, especially given our professions, disagree about knowledge being good. If we disagree about that and about ignorance being bad, then I'm not sure quite what we're engaged in as
no, I wouldn't disagree with that at all. I'm just curious about how it is when you state something is bad that you justify the claim that it's bad. Because as far as I can tell, your argument in your antinatalist argument is based on an attempt at quantification. And, yeah.
Let me flip the question around to you. Why do you think ignorance is bad?
Yeah, I was going to say he should flip the question around, because it comes across as if Jordan Peterson is trying to be like, why is it bad? As sort of like he's pursuing an actual understanding of David Benatar, but it kind of just comes across as if he's I don't know what the best way to put it is, like point scoring, because it's like clearly these things are bad, and yeah, given your occupation, you agree they're bad, and if someone was to ask you why they're bad, you probably wouldn't have an argument as well, because they're just sort of, it's just axiological, it just sort of bottoms out. So it'd be interesting to see what his answer is, because if he doesn't have one, then it's clearly a disingenuous line of inquiry.
Because I think that it increases the probability of unnecessary suffering. And I
Okay, but why is suffering bad? Like, come on, Jordan.
stress unnecessary.
So you are a hedonist?
I don't think that necessarily follows from that simple statement.
Well, I'm asking you, do you want to reduce all good things to pleasure, or to the potential for pleasure, and all bad things to pain or the potential?
Like, Jordan Peterson has just done the thing that he's like putting Benatar on the spot for, because Benatar is saying, X, Y, Z, these are bad and we should avoid them, and then he goes down the line and he eventually gets to the point where it's like we shouldn't procreate, and Jordan Peterson is focusing in on X, Y, Z, and he's saying, okay, why are those bad? And David Benatar goes, well, they're just axiologically bad, and so he says to and then Jordan Peterson says, oh no, but you need an argument for that. You need an argument. And then David Benatar says, okay, well, why do you think they're bad? And he says, well, because they cause suffering. Yeah, but you're just bottoming out at that. It's just axiological. Like, okay, why you need an argument for suffering to be bad? You need an argument. Like, it's just, I don't know. I feel like, to be an academic, surely you'd be a better debater than this.
Pain.
Well, it would depend on how you define those two terms. Definitely. I don't think that that's a sufficient categorical scheme, because I don't think that emotions, and I'm speaking here more as a psychological scientist, I think that emotions are differentiable sufficiently so that pleasure and pain, well, it's clear that pleasure and pain don't cover the territory sufficiently. Okay, so, for example, there's anxiety, and anxiety is a state of negative emotion, but it's technically dissociable from pain.
Well, pain is just like, for me, the most sort of all-encompassing bad thing is suffering. So, pain would be part of that. Unsatisfied desires would be part of that. Anxiety would be part of that. Like, those are all forms of suffering. So I think the reason Peterson is getting confused is because he's focusing on pain, which is one level up. It bottoms out at suffering, but he's focusing on pain and is getting fixated on that. I think that's what's causing confusion.
And so
I agree. That's one of the reasons why I don't think we should reduce everything to pain and pleasure. The point I'm making is that you can cash out my arguments in purely hedonistic terms, but you don't have to. You can cash them out in broader terms. And in fact, specifically in the book, I show that if you use other senses of well-being, like a desire satisfaction account or an objective list account, on all of these accounts, you can reach the same conclusion.
Oh, and just for a bit more interaction, it'd be interesting to find out, and I'll stop pausing it as much because we need to get through the video, but yeah, if anyone wants to put in the chat like what country they're watching this from, it would be interesting to see where people are from. But like, I get some people, they don't like putting in the chat and stuff, so it's up to you, but yeah, it'd be interesting to see what countries people are in.
So I don't think anything in my view commits me to hedonism. I think you can cash out this view on any number of views. But I do think that we should move on, as you've suggested, to this other idea. So you're agreeing with me even about, at least for the sake of argument, that I think you actually agree that that life is tragic, as you put it, that there is more pain than or more bad things than good things, and you think it doesn't follow from that being isn't justifiable. Now that phrase that you've used is, I think, problematic, because it's
And this is when David Benatar wrecks Jordan Peterson for completely misunderstanding what antinatalism is. Like, I'm glad he's like focused in on this and said, like, you know, your whole thing of focusing in on being unjustified, like, you've just got it wrong, son. Like, you've just misunderstood what I'm talking about. You just clearly, your brain has not made contact with what I'm saying. So hopefully he's just going to savage him on this point now, because this is like really frustrating, and it happens a lot. Like, a lot of people do this, but you'd expect someone in the position that Jordan Peterson is in, you'd expect them to be able to, you'd expect them to get the point. Like, you'd expect them to be like the average person who doesn't deal with philosophy and stuff like that and think about ethics normally. Okay, yeah, you can be more sympathetic towards people like that who don't necessarily get what you're talking about. But someone like Jordan Peterson, like, come on, like, you should get this basic distinction. And a couple of people have put in the chat. So Jeremy's from the USA. Whereabouts in the USA are you? Glenos is in Georgia. And Steak is in Germany. Well, hello to those three and to everyone else watching as well.
I think I'm more familiar with that than most people. And there were times.
So just to let anyone know if they don't know, so basically his daughter's had like a lot of health problems. I don't know like the full extent of it. He's had a lot of health problems as well.
During her life.
But he's referring to his daughter.
Where I would say that her suffering had reached the point of being sufficiently unbearable so that it posed a threat to her continued mental health. And so for me, none of this argument is abstract or academic. But I would say three things. First is that I know with certainty that if you asked her whether her existence to date has been something that she would repeat, her answer to that would be yes.
Okay, but this is because she already exists and now has had the will to live imposed upon her, like, through, you know, because we've evolved to have that. Like, she's now addicted to life like the rest of us, like I am, like you probably are who's watching. Like, you know, we're addicted to this thing called life. We want to continue, and we have a will to live. So clearly, as someone who already exists, she's going to say, yeah, I'd do it. Well, not clearly, because sometimes suffering is so bad you wouldn't say you'd do it again. But, like, it's understandable that since she exists, she might say that. But the whole point is that, okay, Jordan, if you were to be sat down, I think Jordan has 2 kids, you to sit down and you have, you know, you're with your wife and you're going to decide, should we have a 3rd kid? Now, clearly, he's aware that they're suffering in life, and a significant amount of it. He's already considered that. And he's also very aware of the fact that the child you may create, the person you may create, will have a significant amount more of suffering in their life and go through horrible things above the baseline of the ordinary things that people go through, because his daughter's been through that. Now, why is it up to you, Jordan, to make that decision and put that on someone else? Like, why do you get to make that decision? You know, if you were going to decide to take some risk or do some action that impacted you, you know, and it could lead to suffering for you, but it could also lead to some benefit, it's up to you. Do what you want. But why is it your decision to be able to say, oh, I'm just going to create someone, and they may have a horrible time. You know, they may have like all sorts of health issues that I have had and my daughter's had, but, you know, so what? Like, they're going to have some good stuff in their life. Yeah, but Jordan, there's no one to exist to want the good stuff. So, like, why appeal to bad stuff that no one ever wanted to justify good stuff that no one ever wanted? It just makes no sense to me.
The second thing I would say, and I think this is a deeper argument, is that...
And also, it's like he's kind of making the assumption that just because his daughter has gone through this suffering and he's gone through suffering as well, I'm not actually sure he'd gone through his illness by this point. Like, he's been, over the past couple of years, he's had like a really shit time with his health, I'm aware. I don't know if he started it by when this recording is, but like, okay, he's been through significant suffering. So is his daughter. Presumably, they both would say now, I'd do it again, and, you know, I want to continue living and I enjoy my life and whatever. No idea if the next person you create is going to say the same. They might just be like, you know what, this is shit. Why was I created? I'm tapping out. If they have the option to tap out. Because obviously with life, you're putting someone in a situation where the only way they can opt out is by killing themselves, which in and of itself is not a nice thing to do, but especially where all around the world, it's actually quite hard to kill yourself.
Because I've thought very much about, it's not as if I think that the arguments that you're making are somehow trivial. And I don't want to give that impression. And I don't want to go discuss the arguments that you're making in a way that casually dismisses them for methodological reasons, even though I think there are methodological flaws. I would say that your argument flies in the face of the deepest human judgment, and here's my logic for that. So if you have a child and you're acutely aware of their potential for suffering, let's say they're 3 or 4 years old, and you know that they can be damaged in all sorts of terrible ways, partly by the force of the natural world and partly by the force of the social world and partly by individual human malevolence, then you're of course terrified for their fragility. And then you might say, well, because that fragility is such an awful burden, it would have perhaps been better never to engender it to begin with. And then I might say, well, do you really believe that? And I would say the answer to that is, well, do you love the child or not in the deepest sense? And if the answer to that is that you do, then I would say that with the entire force of your being, rather than with your mere rational mind, which is attempting to do a faux quantitative analysis, then the love that you express for someone who's fragile and subject to malevolence is the decision at the deepest part of your being that their being is fundamentally good, despite the fact of its subjugation to tragedy and malevolence.
What is he talking about? He's just using all these long words to try and make something sound more fanciful and intelligent than it is. Like, he's already said that if you love someone and they're in a fragile situation, like, you're the one who made them fragile and put them in that situation. What are you doing? Like, if you love someone or the idea of someone, don't put them in that situation. Are you a moron? Oh, Christ. Like, I just don't, like, just the philosophical or mental gymnastics you need to do. Like, clearly, if you love someone, you wouldn't want to put them in a situation where great harm can come to them if you don't need to, and there's no benefit for them if you do it. Like, there's no benefit for them to gain there, which is the case with life. Now, some people would say, I think the bit that people would disagree with there, if they're not already antinatalist, is like, what do you mean there's no benefit? Like, clearly there are good things in life. But yeah, there are good things once you're alive, but I don't think you can consider those a benefit. And the example, like, I think a very simple thing that most people can understand, and Benatar actually does this in his book, he uses an analogy to compare non-existence and existence, and why existence doesn't actually have an advantage over non-existence, but it does have a disadvantage. And he uses the example of 2 individuals healthy and sick. So the purpose of this is to show that there's no advantage in existence over non-existence, but there is a disadvantage. So the analogy goes like this. So you've got sick, and sick is symbolizes existence. So sick can get sick, right? Like existent people can suffer. But sick also has the capacity to heal really well, which for existence, though, that's people, you know, they have the ability to overcome that suffering, or to, you know, have pleasure and enjoy themselves. So sick can get sick, but sick can also recover quite well, like really fast from their sickness. Now healthy does not have that capacity for recovering really well from sickness. So non-existence, you know, non-existence, there is no one to be happy, to overcome any suffering or anything like that. There's no one to have the good things in life, right? But healthy doesn't have that capacity to heal quickly, but also healthy never gets sick. i.e., non-existent people do not exist. There is no such thing as a non-existent person. It's just non-existence. They don't suffer because then there is no one to suffer. And so what Benatar says is, he says, okay, well, it's good for sick that since sick gets sick, that they can recover quickly. But that's not an advantage. The ability to recover quickly is not an advantage over healthy, because healthy doesn't need that. Healthy doesn't get sick, so it doesn't need that capacity. And so it's not an advantage, but it is a disadvantage to sick that they become sick, because they'll experience that sickness, even though they'll recover quickly. So, and this analogy says that, okay, well, existent people, they can experience good things, but that's not an advantage over non-existence, because non-existence doesn't have the capacity or the want or desire or anything for the good things, right? So there's no advantage there. And but the disadvantage comes in where existent people can suffer, but non-existent people can't. And suffering is just something that existent people, you don't want. Suffering for suffering's sake. Like, there can be some instrumental value to some types of suffering, but again, it's not a benefit, because the non-existence doesn't need that instrumental benefit. Hopefully that makes sense. I don't know if I'm just rambling now. I'll probably do a video about that, and I'll make it clearer.
So I've tried very hard to put a crowbar underneath that argument and see if I could flip it in an anti-natalist direction, and it's not evident. And I could say the same thing with my elderly father. Like, he's starting to fall apart, and he's very painfully aware of that, as is everyone around him. And I might say, well, are there steps that I would take to eradicate his vulnerability such that he would no longer be subject to that sort of decay? And the answer to that is, well, as you eradicate vulnerabilities and attempt to redress them so that suffering is no longer an existential reality, then you start to dismantle the very elements of the being that you actually happen to respect and admire and love. And so the fact that human beings can even manifest love for one another in the deepest sense is an indication that our judgment about being,
in the deepest sense,
is not negative.
So that I think rests on a confusion between the case where somebody already exists and the case where somebody doesn't. So if we take your daughter, for example, who does already exist, there's an identifiable person there. There's somebody with whom you're connected, for whom you have this love. And I think when you ask yourself, should she have been brought into existence, you imagine her no longer being there. I think what you're imagining is her vanishing as opposed to never being. Because when you ask that question that you posed to me, like, would you...
Yeah, people definitely do that, and they do that with themselves. When they think of never being born, they think of coming out of existence. But obviously, if you were never born, you wouldn't be here to lament over not being here.
Do you love the child? Well, I think that obviously if there's an existing child, you'll want it to continue living so long as continued living is in its interests. But if you're imagining prospectively, you say, I'm going to have this child, and whatever it might be, or whoever it might be, I'm going to love it. Should I have it? I think the answer to that question is going to be no, because if I care about the interests of that future potential person, and there's going to be more bad in that child's life than there's going to be good, I must avoid that child's life like the plague. I must avoid it coming into existence.
Yeah, and if you have love to give and you have the capacity to raise someone, adopt a child and raise them, or adopt a non-human animal and look after them. Like, then you're actually doing some good in the world, rather than just bringing someone into the existence who didn't need to be here and putting all your time and effort into them. Like, no, do something good in the world. Take someone who's in a shit situation, whether they're human or not, and look after them and give them your love. That's a way better thing to do.
And I must do so out of love.
Well, if you assume that, and this gets us back to our initial problem, which is that the bad and the good can be arithmetically set against one another, and that there's some sort of finitude of measurement in relationship to that. And that brings me to another point of contention, which is that there are various ways of conducting yourself in the world. And so you can't necessarily make generalizations about the quality of being across beings. The more profound pro-natalist, let's say, responses to the fact of suffering in the world say something like the manner in which suffering should be confronted is a matter of personal, let's say character, and that there are modes of being in the world that justify being. And this is where.
Okay, but if confronting suffering is a personal matter, why are you imposing it on someone else when you're procreating? Because that's what you're doing. It's not a personal choice. You're doing it to someone else. So if it's a personal matter, keep it to yourself, yeah?
I think the argument that you're making is most severely, what would you call it, flawed. So if we accept the...
Yeah, and Lalo Racer is saying in the chat that they're a big fan of Glynos, and Glynos does some great animations. To be honest, Glynos, I haven't actually watched many of your animations, but I did actually plan to do a live stream where I go through and watch them. So hopefully they're all still readily available. But if there are any that aren't, I'll contact you about that. But yeah, I've heard a lot about Glynos's animations, so I'm looking forward to going through and watching them.
Conclusion that there's a tremendous amount of suffering associated with individual being and tremendous subjection to malevolence. The question emerges not whether or not being is worth, is something that can be judged worthwhile, but which modes of being might be judged worthwhile. And part of the reason that I've been so attracted to, say, archetypal psychology is because archetypal psychology lays out a path of being, which is something like voluntary confrontation with tragedy and malevolence, and notes that that's a pathway that produces a quality of being that transcends the suffering and limits the malevolence.
Okay, but that's voluntary confrontation with that stuff. When you procreate, you're taking out the voluntary bit because you're forcing someone else to confront all of the things in the world.
And so it isn't that life is something that you can quantify and then compare, because there are modes of life that are qualitatively different, and you can't compare across them in a quantitative manner. So there are modes of being that justify existence, and that's basically the grounds for what you might describe as ethics.
So I tell you what I find frustrating about this is partly you sort of jump from one argument to another as I engage one. But there's another sense in which you're really just offering the same argument in a different form. Because I don't disagree with you that once we exist and we are in a world of suffering, that there are better and worse ways of dealing with that, better and worse ways of confronting that, and that it does say something about one's character, how one responds to the world that one finds around one. You say that this can sort of justify existence, but what I think it does is it justifies the existence that is after you already exist. But I think it's indecent to suggest that you would bring into existence a being that would then have to face these challenges, when there's absolutely no reason from that being's point of view why you should bring it into existence in the first place. So the voluntary confrontation with tragedy and malevolence that you speak about, that's voluntary for the person that already exists. They exist, they find this world around them, and now they...
Yes, David, wreck him.
Voluntarily confronted in one way rather than another way. But nobody is voluntarily confronting existence per se, in the sense of having chosen to exist. That's something that's imposed on us by others. And I'm asking why we justified in making this imposition. I think if we agree, as we are for the sake of argument, that there's more bad in life than good, why would you possibly create a being that then has to confront that?
Well, it's funny that the way that you phrase the question, shows implicitly the manner in which you expect and structure the answer. You said, well...
Sorry, Lalo Racer is asking in the chat about a 3-minute video in which you saw me debating a woman on AN. I've debated a few women on it, so let me know which one you mean. Do you mean the one where it's quite like professionally done, and there's we have like different colors in the background? Because that one is the Channel 4 video, but let me know if that's the one you mean.
Why would we impose the necessity of being on someone who hasn't chosen it? Might say, well, I could.
Oh, okay, so it is that one. So if you want to find so the full one is pretty short. It was a 2-hour conversation. It got edited down to like 5 minutes. So the full one that's publicly available is like 5 minutes long. So that's the one you've probably seen. But I'll be doing a reaction video. I'll be reacting to my appearance on Channel 4 at some point soon.
Also rephrase the question and say, well, it's an offer of an opportunity rather than an imposition of a dreadful fate. I mean, the fact that you regard it as an imposition of a dreadful fate in the manner in which you posed the question indicates that the conclusion is implicit in the premise. Like, I have a granddaughter now, and I would say, well, she's been offered the opportunity to exist. And you'd say, well, no, that was inflicted upon her, but that begs the question. Well, I wouldn't say it was inflicted upon her.
if you don't like that terminology, I'm not wedded to it. It's not the terminology that bothers me. So you're thinking about having a child, and you know that that child exists. It's going to have more bad than good. Why would you?
No, well, I wouldn't say that. I would say that child is going to be.
He literally agreed earlier that he agreed that earlier. This guy.
Exposed to suffering and malevolence. I'm not going to say that there's going to be more bad than good in some broad sense. Well, I said that.
Yeah, fucking pull him up on that, Benatar.
That the idea that there's suffering and malevolence in the world is something that I'm not willing to dispute, and that there may be more suffering and malevolence in the world than the counterpart. I think you can make that argument, but I think it's very much dependent on the manner in which people conduct themselves in the world. And part of your argument too is that you make the case that you can somehow separate the categories of those who already exist from those who only might conceivably exist, with no cross-contamination, so to speak, of the argument. And I think that the reason that you set the argument up that way is because it enables the justification for the claim, for the antinatalist claim. I don't think that there's a sustainable and properly justifiable distinction between those who only might exist and those who currently exist. I mean, do you think it would be okay to put someone out of their misery when they're asleep if they didn't know it? Like, let's say you have someone who's friendless and familyless, and they're asleep, and your judgment is, well, being is something that shouldn't occur. Well, why not just slip them a euthanasia agent and put them out of their misery?
Well, let me come to that now, but first of all, I want to just point out something in the dialectic of our argument here. So we started out by disagreeing not about whether life involved suffering, that you agreed with, but you thought that the asymmetry was unwarranted, the asymmetry between the amount of bad and good that there was. And we had a bit of an argument about that. And then you said, well, why are we even debating this? Because you're actually willing to grant that there is more suffering than good. And so we were going to proceed on the basis of that. And then we had a discussion, and we've come sort of full circle, because now you're wanting to dispute that original claim that got us onto the second part of the discussion. So there's something sort of...
Well, okay, so fine. I understand your objection. Well,
he's exposing him.
Let's say you could look at the world as a whole, and you could say, well, there's more suffering than good.
Benatar is just clearly way more... He's just running rings around Peterson.
And I said I would be willing to go along with that. But then I modified that claim. I specified it and said, yes, but in the individual situation, it depends on how it is that people conduct themselves in life. So even if you say, if a lot of people are doing a bad job of something, let's say, that doesn't mean that there aren't some people who are doing a good job of it. And then I would say, well, the good job that some people are doing is exactly the medication for the suffering and malevolence of being. And if that was more widespread, then it would help solve the problem. So there's no logical inconsistency in my argument. There's just a further refinement of it. And I said also that I was going to give the devil his due.
Also, he's talking about like this medicine for the malevolence of being, okay. So he's basically saying like, oh yeah, there's suffering in life, but we've got a medicine for it. Well, like, so what if you've got a medicine like that's good for people who already exist, but like, why create someone with a problem just because you've got a solution to the problem? Just don't create the problem in the first place. It just makes no sense. What are you doing?
Speak right from the beginning and not go willy-nilly attack every single one of the claims that you're making, but to use an Iron Man approach or a Steel Man approach instead of a Straw Man approach. There is plenty of suffering in the world. There's plenty of malevolence in the world. Maybe that even overshadows the positive elements, let's say, or the elements that justify being. But just because that is the case in the aggregate doesn't mean it's necessarily the case in the specific. And it's the specific that I want to discuss. There are modes of being that justify being. At least that would be my counterclaim. And the modes of being...
What does he mean, justifies being?
When you bring someone into the world, you offer them the opportunity to engage in the mode of being that justifies being, rather than inflicting pointless and reprehensible suffering on them. It's an opportunity.
I think it's helpful that you've now refined your position in this way. In one way it's helpful, in another way it's not, because I don't think it actually gets you out of the difficulties that I've presented to you. So if we're thinking about a specific person, and we think about them coming into existence and their suffering, I don't think we're offering them an opportunity. So think about
this characterization of Benatar's going to go into it.
Analogy here. Think about a scenario where you could unjustly imprison a number of people. And of course that's a bad thing. I think it's going to be a hardship for them. It's going to be an injustice as well. But they might react to this in different ways. Some of them might react to it in very constructive ways and do very good things with this injustice. They might, for example, bring important skills to the prison. They might facilitate the improvement of their fellow inmates. There are all kinds of ways in which they might respond in very noble ways to their condition. And others, of course, might just be broken down by this injustice that's been inflicted on them. The fact that some people will respond well to that situation does not seem to me a justification for having unfairly incarcerated them. And I would say something similar about bringing somebody into existence. The fact that some people respond to the adversities, that they do a better job of responding to this, doesn't, it seem to me, justify the bringing them into existence in the first place.
Yes, well, okay. I also think that indicates the proper level on which this discussion should take place, because
fucking hell. So why didn't he just start with that? Like, if he thought all of the rest of this was just sort of like a bit of riffraff or whatever, like, why didn't he just start at the minute? Why didn't Jordan Peterson just come at the start of the debate and be like, bam, okay, let's just hone in on this bit, because I think this is the core of the debate. This is the proper level on which we should be having it. But he's not. He's just flip-flopping around.
What you've basically put forward there is something like a statement of faith, although I would say it's a statement of negative faith. Your statement of negative faith is the conditions of existence are such that imposing them on someone is, in fact, cruel. And my position would be the conditions of existence are such that offering them the opportunity to exist is a positive good. And there's no way of, and this is why there's been...
He's not engaging with the thought experiment, the analogy of the wrongful imprisonment.
An emphasis for as far back as you can go in human discussions about exactly this sort of issue, about the necessity of faith.
Yeah, this whole framing of it being an opportunity rather than an imposition is just like so flawed. If you, again, because I won't recite it all here, if you want, link in the description, go to an antinatalist handbook. If you go to Why Antinatalism there and then click on philanthropic arguments, there's a whole argument about imposition. And then if you go to the excuses tab, then there's an excuse in there. Don't know what number it is, but you can just go on the page and use the search function on your computer, and there's a rebuttal to the excuse of, well, life is an opportunity, not an imposition.
You have to make an axiomatic statement somewhere along the way to ground your mode of being. And the two axiomatic statements that we're discussing are at odds with one another, but there's no way that you can use derived evidence to support one or the other. They're in fact statements of faith.
So let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Let's imagine that somebody is considering having a child, and they do some genetic tests, and they find out that there's a strong likelihood that if they and their partner were to produce a
There, I've just put the link in the chat for you.
child, it would have a very severe genetic abnormality. That would mean that the child would have a life of suffering, even a short life of suffering, let's say 5 years, and then die. Now, do you think that conceiving that child would be offering it an opportunity or doing something wrong?
Well, I would say in a situation like that, and this is the problem with philosophical discussions of that sort, is the devil is specifically in the details. And I tend not to answer philosophical generalizations of that sort that have that specific point. Because
I'm asking a practical question. Let's imagine
actually, you're not asking me a practical question. Like, I've dealt with questions like that literally dozens of times in my clinical practice. And one of the things...
I thought he was going to say literally thousands of times. It's literally dozens of times. Dozens isn't that much.
That I've learned from that is that the devil's in the details. You know, you might say, here's a slight variant of that. Imagine that you have a woman and you're discussing whether or not she should have a child, and there is some probability that the child will have a genetic abnormality because that runs in her family. Maybe.
And Massilia's watching from France. Hey, Massilia, I was in France last year. I did a hike in France.
Schizophrenia, and you have a serious discussion about whether or not it's justifiable for her to take that risk. And the answer to that is it's unbelievably dependent on the specific particularities of that person's situation and requires an analysis of variables that far exceed the number of variables that you put forward in your test case. And in your test case, you set it up so that the answer that I'm required to give is one that justifies the conclusion that you wish to reach. But I would say it's a bad model of actual reality, and it's not a kind of philosophical game that I'm interested in engaging in. So, because the devil's in the details. If you're asking whether there are children whose lives are so dreadful that the opportunity to not have brought them into existence, given knowledge of that dreadful fate, is justifiable, I would say I could imagine circumstances under which that might be the case, but I don't believe that you could generalize from that to any antinatalist conclusion of any sort. And I don't think that you answered my question about the friendless, familyless person who's asleep. And I do know, for example, that anti-natalist
Fucking hell, he's going everywhere, isn't he? He's just like dodging, and then he's like, oh, but there's this question over here you didn't answer.
arguments of that sort were precisely used by the Germans in the 1930s as they started to accelerate their euthanasia program.
What's that law where the first person to mention Hitler has lost? I can't remember what it's called, but I think it may have just been enacted.
You know, they defined people's lives as characterized by unbearable suffering when they were starting to clean out the mental asylums, for example, and justified the use of involuntary euthanasia on the grounds of decreasing unnecessary suffering.
Jordan is so confused. So if someone's born into a body where they're going, Goodwin's law. Massilia just said, and Glenos is getting in there as well. So, like, if someone is born and they, have some sort of mental condition, however you want to say it, where they, they're like very impaired, they can't engage in, normal life or whatever, and their existence is characterized by suffering more than the average person, then that person already exists, right? So I think Jordan is getting confused about where antinatalism goes. Like, antinatalism is about creating life, right? So those people already exist. Clearly they should be taken care of. Like, they're in a situation where their lives are characterized by suffering, and so they should be looked after and their interests should be taken into account. And Jordan Peterson is saying, oh, well, you don't want to create people whose lives will be characterized by suffering. Therefore, that's also, some people use that as a justification to kill people who lives are characterized by suffering. He's just making a completely unnecessary and illogical link there, I think, to try and win points and distract from the fact that he doesn't have an argument. Because clearly there's a difference. If someone already has a life that's characterized by suffering, clearly help them. If you're deciding whether to bring someone into existence or not, and you know their life can be defined by suffering, why take that risk on someone else's behalf? And I would argue that all of our lives are characterized by suffering. Not that we are suffering in every, moment, but because of the asymmetry, suffering is what we should focus on when we're talking about creating people.
So there's a tremendous danger in the antinatalist position, because
now what I've noticed is a further switch now in the argument. You were responding to one
call him out, fucking savage him.
point of mine, and then you sort of segued now into the argumentum ad Hitlerium.
Well, I thought I dealt with the objection, the question that you asked me with.
He thought he dealt with it. He literally didn't even address the whole prison analogy. What is this guy on?
Regards to bringing a damaged child into the world, and I just switched to a different question. And the question is the implications of your argument, the ethical implications of our argument. We can leave that aside for now if you'd like. But I thought I dealt with your question about bringing a child into the world whose existence would be nothing but suffering. The devil's in the details.
I understand the devil's in the details. I understand that there are going to be specifics there. Of course, it depends on where you set your threshold, and some people are more tolerant of the kinds of suffering that they're going to allow their children to experience than other people are. So I recognize that when I was offering the case of the child who's going to suffer and die in infancy, I wasn't suggesting that immediately we're going to generalize from there to the antinatalist position. What I was trying to do is get a kind of a wedge in the door there to show you that you wouldn't agree that every instance of bringing a child into existence where it's going to suffer is to offer that child an opportunity. So that language that you're saying of offering an opportunity is, I think, at least as troubling as the language of inflicting existence.
Yeah, okay, I'm perfectly willing to agree with that. It's at least as troubling. But that means that there's something to be said for both arguments, which is the case that I'm making. I'm not making the case that every single life under every single condition is worth having in that moment. I mean, but you're anti.
But David is not making an argument about life worth having. It's about life worth starting.
This position is
if a life is worth having, like, someone already has it now. So otherwise it would be a life worth starting. And if a life is already had by someone, then that's up to them.
And if I can put a wedge in there and say, well, wait a second, there's conditions under which your argument doesn't apply, and those are the situations.
Look at the methodology that you use for that. So when you want to show the conditions where it is warranted to bring the child into existence, the way you justify that is by telling me what that child will do with its life. So if it faces its life and it faces it well and it confronts the tragedy well, that somehow that justifies having brought it into existence in the first place. And that is to argue from the perspective of somebody who already exists. That is a different kind of decision from one where you're bringing somebody into existence. Now, you've asked.
Well, I would also say here's another way of looking at it. So let's say you bring a new child into being, and you pledge, having done so, to teach that child how to deal properly with the unbearable lightness of being, and you teach them that the appropriate approach to malevolence and tragedy is to confront it forthrightly, to bear up under the tragedy.
God, the whole thing of like, but I can give the person I'm creating the tools to deal with the suffering that they're going to go through, and the existence that they're going to have. Okay, it's good to give people who already exist tools to deal with existence and the suffering that's entailed in that, yeah? But it makes literally no sense to create someone and create the problem so that you can give them the tools to help alleviate the problem. Not even to solve it, just to alleviate it. It's like saying, I'm going to create someone so that they can have a nice retirement. Like, what does that even mean? There wasn't anyone to want or need the retirement in the first place, so what are you on? Or a more accurate analogy actually would be, I'm going to create someone so that I can then give them the money so that they can have a nice retirement. Because the money would be the tools. It's just absolute ape shit. Or not ape shit, bat shit.
And to restrict the malevolence. And then, as a consequence of that, you help engender someone who's not only good for themselves in their own life, but who lives as a let's say, a beacon to others in the light in the darkness, so that the sum
And you can actually do all of this with an adopted child. You don't have to create someone for this.
total of suffering in the world is dramatically reduced as a consequence of their behavior. That's a high probability event if you're careful and fortunate about how you conduct yourself in relationship to that child.
Well, there are multiple issues that are coming up here. One is about how much good your child's going to do to others, and I can address that later. But I find that argument an appalling argument. I mean, let's imagine you were to remove your child's leg, let's say at birth, but you were to couple that amputation with the sort of upbringing and education that enabled it to deal with this tragedy and to make a positive effect on the world. I don't think that for a second that would justify your removal of the child's leg.
I don't think that if you,
with this education that you provide, that doesn't help.
I don't think that if you're the sort of person who would amputate your child's leg at birth, you would possibly be the sort of person who could provide that kind of upbringing. So that's the sort of hypothetical philosophical situation, again, whose premise is big, the conclusion.
I don't think
it's
that
just not a realistic. It's not a realistic model.
And I don't think that somebody who would bring a child into existence, at least voluntarily, would be the sort of person who would be adequately sensitize the child to the horrors of existence.
Boom. David Benethar just fucked him up.
Yes, I know. Well, that's your fundamental claim, essentially.
Well,
so
no,
I understand that that's
that
the claim that you're making.
You've made an assertion about the kinds of parents these would be, and I'm saying a parallel claim could be made about people who bring children into existence in the first place. But let's set that worry aside for a moment, precisely because there's the parallel claim that can be made. What I'm saying is, if you do something to somebody, and in this case it's creating a being that is going to cause...
Layla Racer has just tipped $10 and says, great antinatalism content, keep going. Maybe I completely missed it, but there should have been, I set it up, so there should have been something that popped up on screen that said that. Maybe I missed it, but thank you so much, Layla Racer. That is actually the first ever tip that's come through. So you're the first ever person to do that. Thank you so much. That's like really I don't actually know. Like, I'm a bit taken aback. I honestly was not expecting that. I didn't think anything would come through. But yeah, thanks so much for that, Laylo. I'm just gonna call you Laylo from now on. But yeah, thanks so much. And I'm glad that you find value in like the content I'm putting out. No, I was going to say something really wanky then. I was going to say, like, even though none of us should be created in the first place, I'm glad that at least my existence can have some sort of positive impact on people. But yeah, no, that's thank you for that. That's amazing. And Jeremy is saying, I love your video about Spanish laughing guy becomes antinatalist. I sent it to my sister and she realized she's antinatalist too. Yeah, that video. So if anyone doesn't know, that's the first and second actually video I ever uploaded on the channel. So after this live stream, go and check that out. And yeah, the it's basically a guy who did a really funny interview, which I don't actually know what he's talking about in the original interview, but loads of people have put subtitles on it, so to make him look like he's talking about other topics. And I changed the subtitles to make it look like he's an anti-natalist and he's taking the piss out of natalists. And it took me a long time to write the script for that and make sure that I got the subtitles right on point. I mean, I did, as in everything I do, I did make some spelling mistakes, so ignore those, but like the message comes across. And a lot of people have said they enjoy it, so I'm glad of that. And of course, Lolo. I'll just call you Lolo, but I have no idea what your real name is, so don't worry, it's all good.
Cause a vast amount of suffering to that being. You don't justify that by coupling it with some kind of education to help it cope with that suffering.
Well,
that's the point
if your claim is initially the claim of asymmetry, see, you can't have it both ways either. If your claim initially is that it's the asymmetry that's the problem, and then I make a case that while there are conditions under which you can redress that asymmetry, you can't then flip around and say, well.
Oh, and just if anyone wants to, like, if anyone puts a question in the chat, then I'm happy to answer questions. But if anyone if anyone like donates and asks a question, if someone makes a donation, if you make a donation like Lalo has, like, definitely feel completely within your rights to ask a question, and I'll definitely answer it. Don't feel like you just have to donate and just not really say anything or anything like that. Like
Now that you've figured out how to address that asymmetry, the whole argument with regards to asymmetry is now invalid. That's not a reasonable. That seems to be exactly what you're doing. Well, what are you saying then? You said I said
you can never compensate. You can never compensate for the harm done by providing some educational adjunct.
Well, you're saying no matter you cannot compensate for the harm done. Let's say we'll lay that argument out. I can educate someone so that they radically increase the amount of good in their life, so that the asymmetry that you described is rectified. And you're
but you can do that with an adopted person. You don't have to create someone to do that. And first of all, and also, he's misunderstood the asymmetry, because even if you educate someone so they're like a genius, like, it doesn't affect the asymmetry, because what the asymmetry is saying is that they never existed before to want that. So that's not like a benefit you've bestowed upon them. That's not a good. That's not a weighting in the good direction for procreation.
Saying, well, the suffering is such so that even in principle that asymmetry can never be rectified. It's like, well, then there's just no sense having the argument, because your position fundamentally is no matter how I redress the initial asymmetry, it's not good enough. Then I would say that casts aspersions on your quantitative methodology to begin with.
You're stipulating something that I think can't be met in reality. So earlier you tried to call me out on the devil being in the detail, and I'd like to do that now with you. So you think that a child can suffer something quite horrible, but that you can offer some kind of remedial
David Benatar is going in. He's savaging this guy.
Action, such as an education or an upbringing, that is going to not only compensate for that, but outstrip it. Now, if you really think that's true, then it's not clear why.
And I do think this is something that people should be pressed on. Like, if given all the horrible things in life, and like, let's just think about one thing, like cancer, right? Now, I'm sure everyone watching this knows someone who has had or has died from cancer, right? I do. My own granddad died from cancer. Cancer is very common, and it's horrible, and it can be even more horrible than horrible with certain types of cancer, right? Now, when you create someone, you're putting them at risk of this stuff. Like, and it's one of those things where you can't fully protect someone from it. So it's not like when antinatalists say you're putting someone at risk of something, it's not like we're saying there's some tiny risk out there that someone, might just in a 1 in a million chance come across. Like, no, these risks are big and they're pretty common. And one example, just one of many, is cancer, right? And I think what people who support procreation need to come up with is like, okay, just take cancer as one thing that you're putting someone at risk of. Just one, ignoring all of the other horrible things in life. Like, what do you think can counteract creating a child who could get cancer? Yeah. Like, imagine if they did get it. Like, what would you say that you could give that child or do with that child or do for that child that would make it better, that you put them in a position where they can get cancer? Like, just spell that out. Tell us, because I think anything that someone comes up with is going to be indecent. What are you going to do? Pay for their college degree? What are you going to do? Are you going to like give them the best birthday party every year? Are you going to, make sure they have loads of all of this sort of stuff? Like, what are you going to do that's going to make it, that's going to counterbalance just that simple thing of cancer? Just one thing, just one thing among all the others. Like, what are you going to do?
You would object, let's say, to the parent who amputates the child's leg at birth. Because that parent can just say, but I'm going to provide the kind of education, the kind of upbringing that is going to make this child produce more good in the world and face this tragedy so well that it's going to outweigh the amputation of the leg. Now, what I'm going to say to those sorts of claims is that these are just indecent claims. You don't.
Well, I'm not willing to play that particular argumentative game, because I think the entire question about leg amputation and remedial education strikes me. It's just patently absurd as a formulation. Why would we go down that road?
Because I'm showing you that the argument you're providing is absurd, and I'm having to do that by providing you with an example that you too will see as absurd. So let's move away from what you take to be.
Okay, well, you've taken the upper hand in the direction of this conversation, and I've been willing to go along with that for the last 15 minutes or so. But I'd like to object to that momentarily and ask you to address the issue I brought up about.
I'm pretty sure Jordan Peterson has been talking more than David Benatar, and Jordan Peterson's the one that always interrupts.
The person who's friendless and familyless and who no one loves or cares for. Is it therefore appropriate while they're asleep to euthanize them? And if not, why not? They're not even going to know that it's happened. And if their life is characterized by unbearable suffering, and the appropriate action is that they should never be, and you're not going to cause anyone any undue misery by eradicating them from existence, then aren't you morally obligated to do it?
Okay, so I know you want to move the conversation in a different direction. I will make one comment about what we've been discussing for the last few minutes, and then I will answer your question.
This is another thing I like about David Benatar. He's not a dick. He doesn't be a dick to people. He's like, okay, cool. You want to play like this? Okay, I'll go down this road. I'll just close off that thing, make one final comment, and then let's go down this road, and I'll savage you on this as well. Because he's not a politician. Like, politicians dodge every question, which is what Jordan Peterson has been. He's been a politician.
And that comment is the general point I'm making, is that I don't think you can justify doing something that's going to result in somebody's extreme to their extreme detriment by the claim that you can add to that some sort of educational and upbringing benefit that's going to override that. So that's my response to that. Now let me come to your person.
Yeah, we can go back to that, because I don't think that's a decent characterization of my position. But that's okay. Let's go back to we'll leave that aside for the time being.
Okay. So you've got this friendless.
You can tell that David is getting a bit like, breathe.
Person who's asleep, and is it wrong to kill him?
No. Do you have a moral obligation to kill him, given your argument? It's stronger than that.
No, I don't. I don't have a moral obligation at all.
Okay, why not?
Precisely why? I'll tell you why. Because I think that person, because he already exists, has an interest in continuing to exist. And if you were to kill him, albeit in his sleep, you're going to be thwarting that interest.
Well, what's the interest?
The interest is in continuing to exist.
Why does that interest exist? If existence is fundamentally flawed, then how in the world could the person have an interest in continuing to exist?
Is Jordan Peterson a moron? And what does he mean by fundamentally flawed? Like, again, he just doesn't understand antinatalism. Like, existence is flawed is just like this vague thing that doesn't really mean anything. What antinatalists are saying is that there is suffering inherent in life, and if you create that, you're putting that on someone else. You're also putting them at great risk of serious harm as well on top of that, and it's all done without their consent, and you're imposing certain things on them that they haven't asked for. Like, if you want to call that existence being flawed, then whatever, like, that's your language you're using. But he's just using these like vague things, and then he's saying like, oh, well, that doesn't make sense. But like, he's the one being vague, and he just doesn't understand what's going on.
An ambiguity. When you say existence is fundamentally flawed, there's an ambiguity between coming into existence and ceasing to exist. So here's the tragedy that I think humans confront. We've got no interest in coming into existence. But once we do, we've got an interest in continuing to exist. For much of our life, that interest is not going to be overridden by the suffering that we experience. Because although we are suffering, it's not so bad for parts of our life that it's going to override that very powerful interest in continuing to exist. But there does often come a point at the end of life, towards the end of life, where the suffering is so unbearable that it does override the interest. And that is, I think, the sort of scenarios where euthanasia or assisted suicide is going to be warranted. So the non-existent have no interest in coming into existence. Those who do exist have an interest in not going out of existence. And I would therefore not only not have an obligation to kill the sleeping, friendless person, I'd have an obligation not to do that.
Well, the non-existents have no interest or no non-interest in coming into being. It's not reason.
Fucking hell, this is like level 0 natalist bullshit. So the whole thing of like non-existent people don't not have an interest on coming into existence. Again, if you go to the handbook, that one is dealt with, and you can read the rebuttal to that.
To talk about the potential interest of the non-existent without talking also about their non-interest. So I also think that that's a specious argument. But I don't think that you've addressed my claim with regards to the sleeping friendless person, because you're claiming that they do have an interest in continuing to exist. But I don't see that you've justified that in any way possible. By eliminating them, you're not causing anyone who exists and knows them any pain. Maybe you're even offering them a relief, and they don't even know you're going to do it. So where's the interest they have in the continuation of their life? And what if you judge their life to be characterized fundamentally by not only suffering on their part, but by their production of undue suffering on other people's parts? Then why don't you have a moral obligation just to end their life?
Jordan Peterson, I just don't think is a serious ethical thinker. So once someone exists, suffering is not the only thing that matters, right? There's also agency, self-determination, things like that. Like, just because someone may be suffering in their life doesn't mean that you can just like kill them and call it a good act. There's also agency involved as well.
There are lots of
you're also making that case about the end of life.
You're jumping from one issue to another, and it's not possible to discuss all of them. So let's discuss one at a time. We won't get to them all. You're actually assuming here a hedonistic view. You're assuming that the only way that we can cash out the badness of somebody's death is in terms of subsequent unpleasant experiences. And that is a faulty assumption. In fact, you're going beyond that assumption. You're going beyond a hedonistic assumption because even hedonists can think that somebody's death is bad for that person. They can think it because of the good experiences that that person is deprived of through their death. So you're actually making two assumptions. First of all, you're making the hedonistic assumption, and secondly, you're making the assumption of what's known as the so-called existence requirement. You're assuming that somebody has to exist in order for them to be harmed. And this happens to be the Epicurean argument, and there's lots to be said for the Epicurean argument, but there's lots to be said for criticisms of the Epicurean argument. And what you're doing in presenting this challenge to me is you're just making all the Epicurean assumptions, and you're assuming there's no response anybody could possibly have to that.
Well, no, I'm just asking you what your response is.
My response is that not all interests are reducible to pleasure and pain.
Well, then I think you've undermined the argument that you make at the beginning of your entire antinatalist track.
I don't reduce everything to pleasure and pain. I've said that, I don't know, probably half a dozen times now.
I know you've said it, but the entire understructure of your argument presupposes it.
No,
so the fact that you can structure it that way and then claim that that's not what you're doing doesn't stop that from being what you're doing. Well, let me see if I can. Okay, well, then I don't understand your argument. You're basically stating.
He finally admits it. Clearly, you don't understand his argument, you buffoon.
That the conditions of existence are such so that it would be better if it never came into being. Is that correct? Have I got that part right?
That's correct, but it doesn't have to be cashed out in terms of pleasure and pain.
Okay, then cash it out some other way.
There are a variety of ways of cashing it out. So one way would be, let's say, on a desire satisfaction account.
Yeah, and he's literally already done this. He did this earlier in the debate, so I don't know why Jordan is going back to this.
So their lives go better or worse depending on whether desires are satisfied. Now, desire satisfaction is not the same as pleasure, because your desire can be satisfied without your being aware of it, and therefore you don't have the positive mental state, but your desire is satisfied. So on that sort of view, I can desire something, including, by the way, things that are posthumous. I can desire, for example, that my body not be desecrated after my death. And then if my body is desecrated after my death, my desire has been thwarted. So something bad has happened to me, even though I no longer exist and even though I can no longer experience it. Now, that is, I'm not wedded to this view, but what I'm telling you is there are alternatives to the hedonistic view, whereby you can explain bad things happening to people without there having a subjective state that accompanies it.
Well, it isn't obvious to me that the desire satisfaction reformulation of your argument is qualitatively distinct from the initial formulation. You've added the additional variable of potential unconscious satisfaction or something like that, but I don't see that substantively changes the structure of your initial argument. Exactly. And so the problem so far is that I'm trying to see. I wouldn't justify being on hedonic grounds, but it seems to me that, and the reason that I'm doing that at the moment is because I'm trying to play the game by the rules that I thought you were setting down.
Well, I think you're thinking wrong there, because
so let's go to your objection. You said, well, it isn't pleasure versus pain; it's desire versus satisfaction.
No, I didn't say it's that. I said there's that's another alternative. The way I've set up the issue is an asymmetry between harms and benefits, between good things and bad things.
Okay, so let's go with that. We don't. Oh, fine. If we won't talk about pleasure and pain, then that's fine. So the bad outweighs the good. We can go with regards to the bad and good. I'm willing to accept the terminology that you lay down. I don't want to quibble about that. My point is that there are modes of conducting yourself so that what you're describing as the good can be. There's one more element to your argument, is that we're characterizing it in terms of good versus bad, and you're making the case that the bad outweighs the good, which is, again, an arithmetic argument, even if it's vaguely parameterized. And then I say, well, wait a second, there's ways that you conduct yourself so that the good outweighs the bad. And then you say, well, you can't do that because you're using essentially an arithmetic parameterization.
They've literally done all of this before, and also you can just get around this whole arithmetic thing by just talking about the axiological asymmetry.
It's like, well,
honestly, I feel bad for Benatar that he had to go through this. This is the sort of pain of existence that he was talking about.
Look, you can't object to what I'm doing if it's the same thing that you're doing. And if that isn't the game you want to play, then we can play a different one.
No, you've now shifted back to the conversation we were having just before you asked me for the final time about the friendless sleeping person. You've moved back to that discussion. So let me try and get us back to the discussion about the friendless person who's sleeping. And what I've said to you is that my argument for antinatalism does not presuppose a hedonistic view. It's formulated in terms of the good and the bad. It is neutral with respect to particular accounts of what is good and what is bad. You've now presented me with a case about the sleeping friendless person, and you've
how can it be neutral with regards to that? I can't just give you a free pass on that. It's like, okay, it's good versus bad, and then you say, well, it's neutral to what the content of those categories is. It's like, no, sorry, it can't be, because then the content.
Not neutral to the content of the categories. It's neutral to different views about how we cash out what things in life are good and what things in life are bad.
Well, neutral in what way? Like, you can't just say that all potential accounts of what's good and what's bad are valid to your argument. That doesn't work. You have to define good and bad somehow.
So in Better Never to Have Been, I pointed out that there are a number of competing conceptions of what makes a life go well. And what I showed is, irrespective of which of those ones you take, irrespective of which of the ones that you choose, the point about there being more bad than good is going to prevail. So perhaps you can come up with some fourth or fifth or sixth account. Perhaps they'll be highly implausible accounts, and perhaps on those accounts my argument will not go through. But on the most plausible accounts, I've argued that there is more bad than good.
Okay, now, so I would say, well, if you adopt a noble and heroic mode of being, then I think that your argument is specious. I don't think that that's true.
You're coming back to the previous point, and this is what I find frustrating about the conversation, is we're moving in a certain trajectory. You actually forced me to move on from the discussion to which you're now bringing me back, to answer your question about the sleeping friendless person. And when I give you a response to that, you're now slipping back in to challenge me on the very issue you asked me to move on from. Now, I'm not prepared to play that game. So I'm going to come back to the sleeping friendless person.
Oh, yes, David. Yes, Queen. Take control of this conversation.
And I'm going to say that when I argue that I ought not to kill him because killing him would thwart an interest of his, I am not committed to the view that he's going to experience anything bad.
So what's his interest? What's his interest? That's the question I was trying to get at. You said he has an interest at stake that you shouldn't be interfering with. Well, so what's his interest?
It's an interest in continuing to exist.
Why does he have that interest?
That's a very good question as to why he has that interest. And it's not clear to me how we would sort of get specifics on this. But
yeah, well, why does anyone have that interest? Like, Jordan has that interest, I have that interest, presumably everyone watching this has that interest. It's just sort of built into us on an evolutionary basis, right? Because like the individuals that didn't have that interest and didn't have that drive to keep living, I mean, they probably wouldn't have lived long enough to reproduce.
Well,
thing is just
anything.
that-
They don't have to be specifics. Just some vague characterization of what his interest might conceivably be would suffice for me.
Well, for one thing, he wants to continue living.
Well, he doesn't if he's asleep.
No, he does in a dispositional state. He's got the desire in a dispositional state.
What if
he
he's
may not have-
suicidal? What if he's a suicidal, friendless
I get what he meant now. He meant like a person who is asleep rather than just like, why does this individual want to... I get what he means now. Again, that's answered in the handbook.
familyless person who's asleep.
Good, and then we come up with refined views that take into account not just actual desires but ideal desires, and those are ones that you would have if you were fully informed. And if it were the case that if he were fully informed he would still be suicidal, then it might be that his life is not worth continuing, but it might still be that I ought not to kill him because I don't have adequate certainty about it. Well, not just certainty, I don't have adequate epistemic confidence that that's the case. So
Yeah, and we value agency as well.
lots of confounding
Okay,
variables that
fine.
come
So
in.
then I would say it would be reasonable for you to not have adequate epistemic confidence to make an antinatalist case for
No,
exactly
that's
the
not
same
case.
reasons.
No,
Well,
it's not exactly the same reason, and I'll tell you why. Because they're quite plausible accounts about why existing people would have an interest in continuing to exist. We can't be certain about them. I can't be sure that the Epicurean argument is false. But if the Epicurean argument is false, and I think it's true, and I act on it, and I go around painlessly killing people, and I'm wrong, I've committed major atrocities. Whereas if my antinatalist argument is mistaken, and I've failed to bring people into existence as a result, there are no major atrocities there. And so if you look...
Yeah, Jordan just misses the massive difference between people who exist and people who don't exist. Because if you're wrong about something that you're doing to people who do exist, you know, then it was bad that you were wrong, right? Like you fucked those people over, and you've maybe fucked yourself over in the process. But if you're talking about procreation and not bringing people into existence who don't exist already, like even if you're wrong that it would have been bad to bring them into existence, even if you're wrong, you've not fucked anyone over because none of them exist to be fucked over.
At how you respond to uncertainty, there's a very
Well,
important
that's not
asymmetry
necessarily
between
the
killing
case.
somebody and not creating somebody.
if your antinatalist argument taken to the logical extreme produced the extinction of humanity, then I would consider that an atrocity. So I don't see that.
It might be an atrocity if you kill them off. I agree about that. But I don't think it'd be an atrocity through humans dying out through non-procreation.
Right,
That's not
precisely.
an
You don't think that would be an atrocity, and I think
Yes.
that's actually part of the extreme danger of your argument.
Okay, but who would it be an atrocity for or to, Jordan? If humanity goes extinct by its own voluntary non-reproduction, who would it be an atrocity for?
I think that would be a catastrophic atrocity, and I think that
Why?
the fact that you claim otherwise indicates that you have a profoundly anti-human perspective, given that your position.
Now he's just trying to poison the well, because basically Jordan Peterson went in with no arguments, realised he's getting savaged, and now he's just trying to poison the well.
You know, here I was just writing a chapter for this book I have coming out, and I was trying to address the motivations of people like the high school kids who shot up Columbine. And I analyzed the writings in some depth, and the more literate of the two makes a very strong antinatalist case. He basically says the conditions of the world are appalling, that human beings' lives are basically rife with suffering and malevolence, and that it would be better if they had never existed at all. And that's the ethical grounds upon which he purports to judge existence as lacking and wanting, and then to act out precisely what he did act out.
Okay, well, I don't know if that's true what he's saying that was in those writings of those people, but like their analysis of reality is, I would say, aligned with antinatalism, but they make a completely illogical link between that and then I should go and kill people. They made that up out of thin air. Completely illogical. Like, how would you get from like? Antinatalism is all about not imposing suffering on people and about not making a significant decision for someone else. Killing someone is the opposite of both of those things, because you're putting someone, one, you're harming them by killing them, and two, you're causing them to suffer because the process of dying is horrible as well, and it can be more horrible depending on how you die, right? So it's the opposite of antinatalism in that respect, but also it's the opposite of antinatalism because you're making a very significant decision on behalf of someone else without their consent, right? So killing someone is completely the opposite of antinatalism, in my view. So I think Jordan is talking shite.
And it's the justification that the vast majority of people who are engaged in such things as mass slaughter use to justify their actions.
So let me note, before I address this, let me note that you've moved on to a new argument now, one which you raised briefly earlier and we put aside, the sort of argument about the Nazis.
Okay, well, what is it that you would like? If you don't like the way I'm moving us, what would you like to discuss?
Oh, no, I'm quite happy to discuss it. All I want to signal is a move to a different argument, because what I find frustrating is that when you sort of run up against the wall in one argument, you just seamlessly...
Well, what walls have I don't see that. I don't believe that I've run up against a wall. What wall is it that you think I've run up against?
I think we'll both listen to the podcast later or the show later.
Well, just name one.
Gentlemen,
well, the issue that we just
if I may interject... Sorry, gentlemen. So we've been going for an hour. I think it's been really reasonably well so far. I just want to have one question for each of you, if I may. David and Jordan, David first. What is your ultimate goal with your argument for antinatalism? Would you like living beings to not exist sometime in the future?
So before I answer that question, I don't want this to end without my addressing Jordan's argument about how dangerous my views are. So may I just quickly say something about that, and then I'll address your question. So is it possible for antinatalists to go out and do terrible things in the name of...
And this whole antinatalism is a dangerous idea is also addressed in the handbook, so you can check that out.
Antinatalism, absolutely, that's possible. But I believe they would be distorting the theory. If we were to judge a theory by its ability to be distorted for nefarious ends, any theory would run afoul. Religious views are abused by some people and not by others. Secular views are abused by some people and not by others. Antinatalism could be abused by some people and not by others. And that's why I want to be quite insistent about what antinatalism does and does not imply. It does not imply the extermination or the murder of anybody. But it does imply, and I'll come now to answer your question, it does imply non-procreation. Now, do I have any sense that humanity is going to, en masse, embrace this view and cease to procreate? No, I'm not deluded. I'm not naive. I don't think that's going to happen. Humanity will come to an end at some point, and so will sentient life in general. And I think that it will be good when there are no sentient beings left, although I am concerned about how they cease to exist. All I can hope to achieve in the short run is for certain people to see the force of the antinatalist arguments and for themselves to desist from procreation, not to bring further beings into existence. That would be further human beings, but also not to breed animals that were going to suffer unspeakably. And I think that every person or every couple that makes that sort of decision is responsible for preventing an immense amount of bad in the world. And those are small measures that each person can take relative to the whole, but they're nonetheless very significant.
Okay, so I'll let you ask me a question in a second. I just want to respond to that.
No problem.
And the issue here is, David claims that his claim that it would be better that sentient life cease to exist, that can motivate, let's say, reprehensible actions, but that's a misreading and a distortion of the position rather than an inevitable and logical consequence of the position. And I would say, well, it's very necessary to distinguish between distortion and necessary and logical consequence. And it's very difficult for me to see how the initial claim that sentience itself should not exist because it's a positive harm, and then to make the further claim, well, that anything negative that might come out as a consequence of that claim is a misreading of its intent, I think is palpably absurd. I think it's a logical consequence, not a distortion. If you
Jordan Peterson revealing the fact that he is an idiot now.
Make the case that existence, sentient existence as such, is so evil, let's say, that it shouldn't be allowed to exist, then people who take that a tiny step farther and act proactively can hardly be said
Or an idiot on this topic anyway. I won't be that harsh.
Necessarily to be distorting the position. It's just convenient for the initial formulator of the position to dissociate himself from those consequences by saying that they're misapprehensions. But I don't think they're misapprehensions. They're logical conclusions. They're logical derivatives.
Well, Jordan, I think I would disagree with you on that one, because one is a voluntary choice not to procreate, and if someone takes that argument, that's the basic argument: just do not procreate, do not create new life. And if someone takes that argument and says, "Oh, so that means I must exterminate life," I think that's a fundamental misunderstanding of the original argument. Wouldn't you say?
Well, possibly, but also no, I wouldn't say that, because I would say that initial argument has it's not bounded with a steel fence around it. It has implications and
no idea is bounded with a steel fence around it. Like, there are so many ideas that are, good and we should base our society around. but they don't have a steel fence around them, and some people can misinterpret them and do horrible shit in their name. So, like, I don't know why he's focusing on this specifically for antinatalism. Like, I will grant him and people generally that antinatalism does come off as a more extreme belief, but upon basic analysis of it, it's not. I mean, what's more extreme? Not putting someone in a position where they can get cancer, get molested, you know, be trafficked, be in an accident, you know, not expose someone to all of this stuff, or put them in a situation where when you don't need to, there's no one compelling you to do that. Which one of those two sounds more extreme?
And you can say, well, some connotations aren't logical consequences of the initial position. But I would say determining what connotations aren't logical consequences of the initial position is an extraordinarily difficult thing to do. And you can't just do it in a manner that's convenient for the ethics of your initial argument. I mean, you could say, well, yeah, it's going too far from the antinatalist position to argue for active extermination. Fair enough. But that's no proof that the argument for extermination isn't somehow implicit in the antinatalist claim. It's convenient if it isn't, but I think there's a great danger that it is, even if it's not a certainty. And I certainly know beyond a shadow of a doubt that a very, very large number of people who've done tremendously used variants of what looks like the antinatalist position. So the empirical data on that, let's say, is very, very sound. Now you can say, well, they've misunderstood it. It's like, well, okay, it's possible that they've misunderstood it, but it's also possible that they've understood it extraordinarily well.
He's not giving any examples of that. I mean, he gave the example of that school shooter before, but like we've already discussed why that was bollocks. So he'd need to give more examples. Like otherwise, he's just talking out his ass.
Well,
okay, then you had a question for me as well. I understand that. I understand that.
And if we take the empirical points you were making, then I think people shouldn't espouse religious views either, because there's plenty of empirical evidence about how that has been taken to extremes and used to great detriment of humanity.
Well, I won't address that. Let me.
Oh yeah, he wouldn't address that because he's religious. So now, ooh, don't attack my religion.
There was a question that you wanted to ask.
Yes, well, I think you have fundamentally answered it. Basically, my question was going to be, what are you afraid of in terms of the utilitarian consequences of David's argument? So, if I'm clear, you are afraid that people will use that argument to cause harm.
Well, no, I wouldn't say that. I am concerned about that. I don't think that's my fundamental objection. My fundamental objection is that the doctrine is deeply nihilistic and anti-human, and that it is precisely the sort of doctrine that undermines the kind of faith in being that it's necessary for people to manifest in order for them to live forthrightly and nobly and properly in the world. And I think it's terribly dangerous in that regard. And I don't think that David has done a decent job at all.
I mean, one, it's not nihilism. Well, it depends what you mean by nihilism. If you mean existential nihilism, then okay, sure. I don't think it has to be, but like, sure. If you're talking about moral nihilism, like antinatalism is literally the opposite of moral nihilism. Moral nihilism is basically saying, well, nothing really matters, so nothing's right or wrong. But like antinatalism is saying, no, there are things that are right or wrong, and procreation is one of the things that are wrong. Therefore, I'm going to take this principled stance and not partake in it and try and convince other people not to. So it's completely the opposite of at least moral nihilism. And what was the other thing he said? Nihilistic and anti-human. Yeah, how is it anti-human? I mean, it depends what you mean by anti-human, but like antinatalism is all about care for humans and not wanting to inflict pain and suffering and unnecessary risk and all of this stuff on them. So like, how is that anti-human?
Of addressing the fundamental objection to the antinatalist argument, which is the idea that being is somehow flawed beyond redemption, let's say, which I think is the fundamental answer. There are modes of being that redeem being, and the mode of being that redeems being is voluntary heroism in the face of tragedy and malevolence, and that lifts up being and ennobles it. And even if that's not the mode of action that characterizes most people, it's a potential mode of action, and it's the mode of action that is the proper move forward towards redemption rather than the cessation of being itself. And I would say that's the fundamental religious conundrum that's plagued mankind since the beginning of time. Life is suffering and rife with malevolence. What do you do about that? Well, one answer is cease to exist or cease existence itself. The other is to heroically confront the problem of being, and to lift up the tragedy of the world on your shoulders, and to move forward in a courageous manner, and to redeem being as a consequence of your actions. And I think that and it's not a matter of educating people to do that. It's not some manipulation of the manner in which they view the world. It's the freeing of the part of their spirit that's so powerful and so strong that it can withstand the tragedy of being and its malevolence without suffering beyond their capacity, and without becoming corrupt. And I would also say that that's the core idea that underlies Western civilization itself, which is that the individual, say made in the image of God, has sufficient intrinsic nobility of spirit to withstand the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune and to prevail. And that's a positive good, not a mere medication for an intolerable disease.
Yeah, that stuff is good for people that already exist. How has this not gotten through his skull yet? Like, he's just misunderstanding it over and over again and confusing starting a life and continuing a life that already exists. It's like the most base level. Like, I think a monkey could do a better case of arguing against antinatalism than John Peterson. And that's no offense to monkeys. That's an offense to... Actually, if it's an offense to John Peterson, then it would be offense to monkeys. Okay, it's no offense to monkeys.
And the fact that I'm, what would you say, I oppose the antinatalist position is because I think it's pessimistic, fatalistic, and fundamentally existentially cowardly, because it doesn't, it's anti-human in that it...
How is it cowardly? If someone could make the case that if you're shying away from suffering yourself, someone could make the case that's cowardly. I wouldn't make that case, but someone could, if they wanted to be this sort of tough man, stoic type, they could make that case. How is it cowardly not to put someone else in harm's way? What?
Denies the fact that...
Surely that's the thing that's cowardly, because you're putting in someone in harm's way, and you're always doing it for your own benefit, because you want the experience of raising a child, or you want the fulfillment that comes from that, but you're putting someone else in harm's way to get that. Surely that's the cowardly thing, because you're shying away from maybe the unfulfillment or the loneliness or whatever that may come from non-procreation. You're shying away from that. You're putting someone else in harm's way so that you can get the benefits. That seems more cowardly to me.
The human spirit has the capacity to grapple with being, even given clear apprehension of all its intrinsic horrors. So I think it's a terribly dangerous position, and I think it leads to nothing but terrible outcomes, despite David's claims that anyone who takes this argument to any terrible conclusion is misunderstanding it. I don't think they're misunderstanding it at all.
Okay.
In Faust, for example, in Goethe's Faust, the character Mephistopheles essentially makes an antinatalist argument. He says that the conditions of being are so unbearable that it would be better if being never existed at all. And Goethe outlines the consequences of Mephistopheles' position, and they're dreadful. He's Satan himself, essentially, in the Faust story. And so I think David's disavowal of the negative consequences of the antinatalist position are convenient for him to retain some belief in the ethics of the position, but bear no relationship whatsoever to how the philosophy will manifest itself in the real world.
Okay, that may be a point. David does. Dave, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but you do agree that your view is pessimistic. I don't know about the cowardly part. Do you want to respond to that in more of a closing type of statement? Because I think Jordan has given quite a lengthy statement there in rebuttal.
Let me make a conciliatory comment by way of conclusion. So I do think that my position is a pessimistic one, although I don't think unduly pessimistic. It's certainly not a nihilistic position. It's based on very fundamental moral values. And all I hope that if it's my pessimism that needs to be tested, or Jordan's optimism, I hope that it's my pessimism that's tested.
Okay, that's
So what that means is that rather than the terrible things befalling him that would cure him of his view, I hope that good things befall me to try to cure me of mine.
All right.
Yes, I hope that too. I truly do. I truly do.
Well, it's been almost an hour and a half of two academic giants, and I think some very interesting argumentation. Thank you both for joining us and for having this discussion. I know it hasn't been easy at times and frustrating for both of you, perhaps, but I do think listeners will gain a lot of...
Okay, they're obviously closing up, but there's like 5 minutes left of the video, so I'm just going to hang on to see if anyone's going to do any more closing statements, but if not, we'll round this off.
Value out of this conversation.
Thanks very much.
Yes, well, thank you. Thank you for, excuse me.
No problem.
Thank you for setting it up, and also David for agreeing to talk about this. It's a very difficult issue, and I think you have substantial philosophical courage in even daring to put it forward as an argument.
Thank you. Nice to discuss it with you.
David, just I know you don't like to be found, but if perhaps people do want to engage with you, do you want to give an email address where they can send polite emails and have discussion, or not?
I get far too many communications already. I'm just unable to deal with them all.
You'll stay out of it.
If people want to read more, I'd rather stay out of it. If people want to read more, they can read the books that I've written.
Sure. And Jordan, you've got a book obviously coming out very soon, but for those...
Cool. I think this is. I think that's basically done. I think they rounded off. Yeah, I mean, people can make of that what they will, but that is the infamous, I would say, debate between Benatar and Jordan Peterson. Train wreck. I mean, I think like Benatar is maybe unbiased, but I think like Benatar clearly comes out on top, like very level-headed. I think was erring towards losing his temper because Jordan Peterson was being so frustrating, but I don't know. I just think, I mean, Jordan Peterson was just dancing around like he was on hot coals. Yeah, I don't know. It was kind of embarrassing. I don't know, like, I know he's famous for talking on other issues, so people take him seriously on other issues, but like, this is one reason why intellectuals, you know, I'm not a fan of saying stay in your lane, and I'm not saying it here. I'm just saying that it's probably unadvisable for intellectuals who are experts on certain issues to speak about other issues that basically, I feel like if an intellectual is, and this is a good case, if an intellectual is intelligent and well informed on a particular issue, they can gain status from that, right? And if they gain status from that and people look at them, you know, people, they gain a following, and this has happened with Jordan Peterson, they gain a following, and if they're not mature enough and humble enough, it will go to their head, and it will mean that they will then start to comment on other issues that they're just not qualified to speak. Like, they don't have the credentials for it, and they just make a fool of themselves, and they're just ill-informed. And I think this is one example. Like, on psychology or whatever Jordan Peterson is an expert in, I'm sure he's a solid voice to listen to. I'm not saying he is. I'm just saying, you know, it could be the case. But on this issue, absolute bollocks. And this goes for so many intellectuals. I think it's something that I think it was Thomas Sowell. He's written loads of books, like an academic intellectual in the US, and he wrote a book. I haven't read it, but I've been meaning to, and I think it's called Intellectuals and Society. And in it, he basically says that he defines an intellectual as, like, you know, their end product is ideas, and he says that a good rule of thumb for intellectuals is basically, you know, we shouldn't force people to stay in their lane, but if you want to be taken seriously, choose a lane, get really good at it, and basically try to stay in that, because if you stray out, you're just going to get wrecked, generally speaking. But yeah, anyway, you guys make of that what you will. A few people have put some in the chat. Peterson did not really understand the Antinatalist philosophy. You should have done that before debating. Yeah, clearly. I mean, I think he was just one of these classic people that has heard about it, thinks it's just this sort of, like, you know, seminar room philosophy where people bemoan their own existence or whatever, and he thought he could come in there and clean up, but he got wrecked. And then Glynos is saying, have you seen Peterson's latest interview with Dawkins? It's even worse than this one. I haven't seen that, actually. I don't know if I'll look it up, but I don't know if you can put links in the chat. But if you have a link, Glynos, and you can put it in the chat, if YouTube allows you, definitely do that. I'll check that one out, because I haven't seen that. I watched one video of Peterson's recently where, you know, he got suspended from Twitter recently, and he put a video on his YouTube channel responding to it, and he was, like, very unhinged in that. Like, I think he's kind of lost his well, I mean, I don't think his mechanism was intact in this interview, but he's definitely lost his mechanism in that video that I watched. But I'll check out that interview with Dawkins because that's interesting. Because obviously, like him and Dawkins, I can see like a lot of clashing there happening more on the religious side of things. But yeah, if anyone has any more thoughts, put them in the chat. Let me know. But if not, do I have anything else I need to say? So yeah, there's other things coming up, but I won't say them now just because I don't know exactly what's going to come out when. But yeah, got more live streams and videos coming out, so look forward to that. I'll always like, you know, announce them and stuff and share them around on Facebook and all of that sort of stuff. And I just want to thank Lalo again for the donation. That was amazing. Thank you so much. I honestly I don't know how to thank you enough. And on the point of donations, one thing I do want to do in the future, maybe, you know, when it's more worthwhile and I've got, you know, there's a few more people that watch the channel, I want to do like charity streams where we have like a themed stream and then we have a donation goal amount that we want to raise, and it's for a specific charity or organization or whatever or cause, and we raise money for that and we see if we can hit the total. You know, we can start with the totals pretty low, you know, just to ease into things. But yeah, so I hope to do streams like that as well. I think that would be good and worthwhile. And Lalo says, do collabs with other ANs. Yeah, well, I've started a list of people I want to, you know, have conversations with, interview maybe, that sort of stuff. And that stuff will come in due course. I haven't reached out to anyone yet. I haven't like made any headway with that. But that is something that will be coming up in the future. If you have any suggestions, you can either message in the chat now and I'll note them down, or you can message me anytime on Instagram. And the link to my Instagram is in the description of this live stream and all the videos that I put up. Cool. Okay, so yeah, thanks again for tuning in and watching. There was actually another video I was going to get to watching, but I think this stream has gone on long enough. So maybe I'll react to that other video and upload it just as a regular video. But yeah, thank you again for joining. I hope you enjoyed watching that train wreck as much as I did.